Hello everyone, and welcome back to X-Ranger. Before we begin, I thought it would be interesting if each of you could leave a comment indicating which part of the world you're joining us from. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Now let's get comfortable, relax, and start our program. I'm Shannon Morgan, and I've lived on this property in Washington for more years than I can count. I used to be a school teacher, retired now, and this place was supposed to be my peaceful haven, but since 2001, something's been off. Every year, from June to November, the woods around my house come alive in ways that make my skin crawl. It's not the usual wildlife. Deer, raccoons, even the occasional bear don't act like this. No. This is different. Deep, guttural calls that echo through the trees like nothing I've ever heard, mixed with this rapid, rhythmic chatter that sounds almost like a harsh, angry language. There are wood knocks too, not random, but in patterns, like someone signaling. And the smell, God, the smell. It hits you out of nowhere, this awful mix of skunk and urine and wet animal, so strong it makes your eyes water. Sections of my fence get damaged, boards ripped out or pushed over, and I never see what does it. It's been going on for years, and I've learned to live with it, but I've never gotten used to it. Then, in October 2006, everything changed. That was the day I stopped just wondering and started knowing deep in my bones that something intelligent and massive is out there watching us. That morning started like any other in October. The air was crisp, with that chill that seeps into your joints, and the leaves on the maple trees were turning fiery red and orange. I'd woken up early, around 6, made myself a cup of coffee, and sat at the kitchen table, staring out the window at the woods. It was still dark, the sun not yet up, and the forest was quiet, too quiet sometimes. I remember feeling uneasy, like I did most mornings during those months. My son-in-law was staying with me for a few days. He'd driven up from Seattle to help me with some repairs around the property. He's a good kid, practical, not one to jump at shadows. That day, he was planning to head back home, so he needed to warm up the car before the long drive. Around 7, he went out to the driveway. I heard the car engine turn over, that low rumble cutting through the morning silence. I was tidying up in the kitchen, wiping down counters, trying to shake off the nagging feeling that something was wrong. The smells had been stronger the night before. That skunk and urine stench had lingered near the back fence, and I'd heard a few of those wood knocks, sharp and deliberate, like someone tapping out a code. But I pushed it aside, told myself it was just my imagination running wild again. Then I heard my son-in-law shout. Not a loud yell, but this choked-off sound, like he'd seen something he couldn't process. I dropped the dishcloth and rushed to the front door. When I opened it, the cold air hit me, and I saw him standing by the car, frozen, staring into the woods. The car's headlights were on, cutting 2 bright beams through the dim light, and that's when I saw it too. Beside the big maple tree at the edge of the driveway, maybe 30 feet away, stood this thing. It was massive, easily 8 feet tall, covered in dark, shaggy hair that looked almost black in the headlights. It was swaying, not like a tree in the wind, but agitated, like it was pissed off or nervous, and its eyes, they were red, glowing red, reflecting the headlights back at us. I felt my heart slam against my ribs, so hard I thought I might pass out. My breath caught in my throat, and for a second I couldn't move. It was just standing there, swaying, and I could see its chest moving, like it was breathing heavy. Then, as soon as it realized we were looking at it, it moved. Not slowly, but in a burst of speed that was terrifying. It bolted toward the trees, and the ground actually shook. I felt it through my feet, this vibration that rattled the porch boards. It crashed through the underbrush, and I heard branches snapping, leaves rustling, and then this loud splash, as it must have hit the culvert that runs through the green belt behind my property. The sound echoed like it was tearing through everything in its path, and then it was gone. Just like that, my son-in-law stumbled back toward the house, his face pale, eyes wide. "Did you see that?" he whispered, his voice shaky. I just nodded, my own hands trembling. We stood there for what felt like forever, listening to the silence that followed. The car was still running, the headlights still on, but now they were just illuminating an empty space where that thing had been. After a few minutes, we grabbed flashlights from the hall closet. My heart was still pounding, and I could feel this cold sweat on my back. We walked out to where it had been standing, near the maple tree. The grass was trampled down, and there was this strong, pungent smell hanging in the air, that same skunk and urine odor, but sharper, more concentrated. I shined my flashlight on the ground, and I could see impressions in the soil, like big, deep footprints. But they were messy, as if it had pushed off hard when it ran. We followed the path it took, toward the trees, and the destruction was obvious. Bushes were flattened, small branches broken, and there was this trail leading into the dense green belt. We didn't go far into the woods. It was too dark, too scary. But we stood at the edge, listening. Far off, we could hear the echo of its escape, this fading rustle and the occasional crack of a branch. It was like it was still moving, putting distance between us. My son-in-law kept shaking his head, muttering, "What the hell was that?" I didn't have an answer. All I could think was that this was what I'd been feeling for years. This was the source of the sounds, the smells, the damaged fence. It wasn't my imagination. It was real, and it was big, and it knew we were here. We went back inside, locked the doors, and sat in the living room, not saying much. The sun started to come up, casting a weak light through the windows, but it didn't make me feel any better. I kept replaying it in my head, the way it swayed, those red eyes, the sheer speed of it. My hands wouldn't stop shaking, and I had to clutch my coffee mug just to steady them. My son-in-law ended up staying another day. He didn't want to drive right away, and honestly, I was glad for the company. Later that morning, we went back out to look around in the daylight. The trampled grass was still there, and the smell had faded a bit, but it was lingering. We found where it had splashed through the culvert. The water was muddy, and there were more impressions on the bank. But no clear tracks, nothing we could photograph or show to anyone. It was just gone. And that's the thing that haunts me. It was so fast, so deliberate. It knew we saw it, and it ran, but it didn't seem panicked. It felt calculated, like it was in control. That day changed everything for me. Before, I could almost convince myself it was just odd coincidences, maybe a bear or kids playing pranks. But after seeing that thing, there's no doubt in my mind. It's intelligent, whatever it is. It watches us, and it comes back every year, from June to November. I've set up cameras, talked to a few neighbors, but no one else has seen it up close. Just the sounds, the smells, the fence damage. And now, every time I hear those guttural calls or catch that stench on the wind, I remember that October morning, and I feel this cold dread settle in my stomach. I'm vigilant, always looking over my shoulder, but I'm never at ease. It's out there, just beyond the trees, and I don't think it's ever going away. Story 2. That day started out hot and humid, like most July days in Ohio. The air was thick with the smell of wet earth and decaying plants from the marsh. My friend, I'll just call him my friend because he'd rather not have his name out there, and I had packed up my dad's old aluminum boat with camping gear, a cooler of sodas and sandwiches, and the turtle hooks we'd made from fishing line and weights. We shoved off from the bank around 4 in the afternoon, the sun beating down on us, and paddled out to this small island we liked. It wasn't much more than a patch of high ground surrounded by reeds and murky water, but it felt like our own private spot. We spent the first couple of hours setting the hooks along the edges of the marsh. The water was dark and still, with lily pads floating here and there, and every now and then a frog would plop into the water or a dragonfly would buzz past. I remember the sweat trickling down my back, sticking my t-shirt to my skin, and the mosquitoes buzzing around our ears. We slapped at them and joked about how we were probably the only ones dumb enough to be out in this heat. My friend was a year older than me, and he was always the cautious one, double-checking the knots on the hooks and making sure we had enough supplies. I was more laid back, just enjoying the adventure. After we finished setting the hooks, we set up camp on the highest part of the island. We laid out a tarp and unrolled our sleeping bags, then built a small fire pit with rocks we gathered. The sun started to dip below the trees, casting long shadows across the water, and the temperature dropped a bit, but the humidity stayed. We cooked hot dogs on sticks over the fire, and the smell of smoke and burning meat mixed with the marsh smells. It was familiar and comforting. As it got darker, we turned on a battery-powered radio we'd brought, tuning it to a rock station out of Toledo. The music was low, just background noise, and we talked about school, girls, all the usual stuff kids talk about. The moon came up early that night, and it was one of those bright, almost full moons that lit everything up like daylight. You could see the ripples on the water and the shapes of the trees on the far bank. It was peaceful, but I remember feeling a little on edge, though I couldn't say why. Maybe it was the isolation, or the way the sounds of the night seemed louder than usual. Crickets chirping, frogs croaking, the occasional splash of a fish jumping. It was all normal, but something felt off. Around 10:30, we were sitting by the fire, which had died down to embers, and the radio was playing some song by Led Zeppelin. That's when we first heard the splashing. It wasn't like the small splashes we'd heard earlier. This was heavier, like something big moving through the water. At first, I thought it might be a deer or a beaver, but it sounded too consistent, too purposeful. My friend heard it too, and he looked at me, his eyes wide. "You hear that?" he whispered. I nodded, and we both fell silent, listening. The splashing kept getting closer, and it was coming from the direction of the marsh where we'd set the hooks. My heart started beating faster, and I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. Without saying anything, my friend reached over and turned off the radio. The sudden silence was eerie, like the whole world had gone quiet except for that splashing. We stood up slowly, peering into the darkness toward the water. The moon was so bright that we could see the surface of the marsh clearly. And that's when we saw the ripples, big spreading circles moving toward our island. Whatever was making them was hidden by the reeds, but it was coming straight for us. I remember my mouth going dry, and I could feel the hair on my arm standing up. My friend grabbed my arm, his grip tight. "What is that?" he said, his voice shaky. I didn't have an answer. We just stood there, frozen, watching as the ripples got closer and closer. Then, about 75 yards away, something stepped into view. It came out of the deeper part of the marsh, where the water was waist-deep on a person. But this thing was massive. It stood upright like a man, but it was huge. I'd guess at least 7 or 8 feet tall, with broad shoulders and long arms. Its body was covered in dark, shaggy hair that looked wet and matted from the water. The moon shone directly on it, so I could see the details clearly. The way it stood perfectly still, facing us, but I couldn't make out its face because it was in shadow. It didn't move for what felt like forever, but later, we figured it was about 45 seconds. In that time, I couldn't breathe. It was like all the air had been sucked out of the world. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would burst out of my chest, and I could feel a cold sweat breaking out all over my body. My friend was trembling next to me, and I heard him whisper, "Oh my God, what is that?" I just shook my head, unable to speak. We were both too scared to move, too scared to make a sound. I kept thinking, if we stay still, maybe it won't see us, but it felt like it was looking right at us, even though I couldn't see its eyes. The silence was deafening. No more splashing, no frogs, nothing. Just the faint rustle of the reeds in the breeze. Then Without any warning, it turned. It didn't lumber or struggle. It moved smoothly, almost gracefully, and started walking away through the marsh. The water and muck should have been tough to move through. I'd been in that stuff before, and it's like walking through thick mud, but this thing glided through it like it was nothing. Its legs moved effortlessly, and it disappeared back into the reeds within seconds. The whole time, it didn't make a sound. No grunt or splash, just silent movement. As soon as it was gone, the spell broke. My friend let out a gasp, and we both stumbled backward, almost tripping over our camping gear. "We have to get out of here now," he said, his voice high with panic. I nodded, my hands shaking as I started grabbing stuff. We didn't even talk about what we'd seen. We just acted on pure instinct. I remember my fingers fumbling with the zipper on my sleeping bag, and I couldn't get it to close because I was trembling so much. The fear was like a physical weight on my chest, making it hard to breathe. We threw everything into the boat haphazardly. Sleeping bags, the cooler, the radio, not caring if it was organized. My friend kept glancing over his shoulder toward the marsh, like he expected the thing to come back any second. I felt the same dread, like we were being watched. The moon was still bright, but now it felt menacing, casting long shadows that seemed to move on their own. We pushed the boat into the water, and the cold splash woke me up a little, but the fear didn't fade. Once we were in the boat, my friend started paddling like his life depended on it, and I joined in, both of us rowing as fast as we could away from the island. The water was black and still, and every ripple we made felt too loud. I kept looking back, half expecting to see that dark shape following us, but there was nothing. The marsh was quiet again, too quiet. It took us about 20 minutes to get back to the bank where we'd started, and the whole time, neither of us said a word. The only sounds were the dip of the paddles and our ragged breathing. When we reached the shore, we dragged the boat up onto the grass and just stood there for a moment, panting. The night air was cool, but I was sweating and shivering at the same time. My friend finally broke the silence. "What was that?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I shook my head again. "I don't know," I said, and I meant it. We loaded the gear into his dad's truck and drove back to my place in silence. The streets were empty, and the houses were dark, and it felt like we were the only people left in the world. We never talked about it much after that night. My friend seemed spooked for weeks, and I caught him looking over his shoulder whenever we were outside. For me, it stuck with me. The image of that thing standing in the marsh, motionless, then moving off like it was nothing. I've spent years trying to rationalize it, thinking maybe it was a bear or a person in a costume. But bears don't stand upright like that for so long, and no person could move through that muck so easily. Plus, the size was all wrong. It was too big, too solid. That experience alone might have been enough to make me wonder, but it was followed by a couple of other things over the years that sealed it for me. Like in 1977, when I was out on my back porch in Ohio and heard this scream that was part howl, part something else. It made the hair on my neck stand straight up. My dad heard it too, and he was a tough guy, but he locked the doors right after and said it was probably a heron or a bobcat, though he didn't sound convinced. Then in 1983, while squirrel hunting with my cousin in Clyde, we heard a similar sound at 4:30 in the morning, and it unnerved us so much we packed up and left before sunrise. But that first sighting in '74 was the one that really got to me, because I saw it with my own eyes. Even now, as a 45-year-old retired Navy officer living in California, I still think about that night. I've been all over the world, seen a lot of strange things, but nothing ever shook me like that. Sometimes when I'm out hiking or just sitting outside at night, I'll hear a noise, and my heart will skip a beat, and I'll remember that thing in the marsh. I don't know what it was, and I probably never will, but I know it was real, and that's enough to keep me up some nights wondering what else is out there that we don't understand. Story 3. Okay, so this happened about 2 years ago, but it feels like yesterday. I still get this cold sweat whenever I think about it, and my hands are shaking just typing this out. I've never told anyone besides my boyfriend and his family, and even then, it's like nobody really gets it unless they were there. But I need to get it off my chest because it's been eating at me. It was a Friday evening in late October, right around dusk. The sun was dipping behind the hills, casting long shadows across the fields, and the air had that crisp autumn chill that makes you want to curl up with a blanket. My boyfriend and I were out in his beat-up old truck, just doing our usual rounds on the cattle farm his family owns in rural Kentucky. We'd been together for a couple of years, and I'd gotten used to helping out with the chores, checking fences, making sure the cows were where they were supposed to be, that kind of thing. It's peaceful out there mostly. You hear coyotes sometimes, or see deer, but nothing that ever really spooked me before. That day, we'd been out for maybe an hour, just driving along the perimeter of the property. The truck's radio was playing some country station softly, and we were talking about nothing important. What to have for dinner, whether we should go into town over the weekend. Normal stuff. Then, as we were coming up to the main gate that leads out to the county road, I remembered something. The gate's this heavy metal thing, and if it's left open, the cows can wander out. Or worse, someone's dog might get in and spook them. I'd asked my boyfriend earlier if he'd locked it after we came through, and he'd said yeah, but he sounded unsure, like he kind of mumbled it, and I could tell he wasn't 100%. So I said, "Hey, are you sure you locked that gate? I don't want your stepdad getting pissed if we have to round up strays tomorrow." He shrugged, his eyes on the road. "I think so, but maybe we should double check." I agreed, because it was better to be safe than sorry. Instead of turning around right there, I figured we could pull into the neighbor's place next door. Their driveway runs parallel to our fence line for a bit, and from there you can see the gate clearly. The neighbors were building a new house or something. It had been under construction for months, so their driveway was all torn up with gravel piles and machinery sitting around. Nobody was ever there after dark, so it seemed like a good spot to stop for a minute. I pulled the truck into their driveway, crunching over loose gravel, and parked maybe 50 feet from the road. The engine was still running, and I left the headlights off to save the battery. The truck's old, and sometimes it doesn't start easy if you drain it. The sky was getting darker by the second, with just a faint orange glow on the horizon. I rolled down my window a crack to let in some fresh air, and that's when things started to get weird. At first it was just quiet, the kind of quiet that settles over the countryside when the day's winding down. I could hear the engine ticking as it cooled, and the distant lowing of a cow from our pasture. My boyfriend had hopped out to take a leak behind a tree. He's not shy about that stuff, so I was alone in the truck, waiting. I remember feeling a little bored, drumming my fingers on the steering wheel and thinking about how hungry I was. Then, out of nowhere, this smell hit me. It was foul, like nothing I'd ever smelled before. Musky and thick, like wet dog mixed with something rotten, but stronger. It reminded me of the time we found a dead possum under the porch, but this was way more intense. It seemed to seep right into the cab, even with the window only open a little. I wrinkled my nose and glanced around, thinking maybe something had died nearby. But then I heard it. A low, deep growl that made the hair on my arms stand up. It wasn't like a dog's growl. Dogs sound sharp, kind of yappy sometimes. This was deeper, guttural, like it was coming from something much bigger. It seemed to vibrate through the air, and I felt it in my chest. My heart started pounding right away, thumping against my ribs like it wanted out. I froze for a second, my hands gripping the wheel, and I strained to listen. The growl came again, closer this time, from the direction of a big gravel pile off to my left. The pile was maybe 10 feet high, all jagged rocks and dirt, and it was casting a shadow in the fading light. I don't know why I did it. Maybe instinct, but I reached for the headlight switch and flipped them on. The beams cut through the gloom, illuminating the gravel pile and the area around it, and that's when I saw it. Behind the pile, partly hidden but not enough, was this massive figure. I mean, huge. It was leaning against the gravel like it was resting or watching, and it was covered in long, blackish hair that looked matted and dirty. The hair was so thick I couldn't see much of its body, but it was tall, way taller than a man. Its eyes, God, its eyes were what got me. They reflected the headlights back at me, shining bright like animal eyes do, but bigger and more intense. They weren't moving, they were just fixed on me, staring right into the cab. I couldn't look away. My breath caught in my throat, and I felt this cold dread wash over me. It was like time slowed down. I could see the way it was leaning, one arm braced against the gravel, like it had been there for a while. The smell was overwhelming now, making my stomach churn. I thought, this can't be real, this has to be a bear or something, but bears don't stand like that, and they don't have eyes that lock onto you with such intelligence. It felt like it was studying me, and I was just prey. My brain finally kicked into gear, and I screamed for my boyfriend. It wasn't a polite shout. It was a raw, panicked yell that tore out of me. Get back here, now. I don't even know if I formed words properly. It was just noise. I kept my eyes on the thing, terrified that if I looked away, it would move. I heard footsteps crunching on gravel, and my boyfriend came running from behind the truck. He must have heard the fear in my voice because he didn't ask questions. He just yanked the passenger door open and jumped in. "What's wrong?" he said, his voice tight. I couldn't speak. I just pointed, my hand shaking. He followed my gaze and his face went pale. "Holy shit," he whispered. That's when the thing moved. It didn't rush us or anything, but it pushed off from the gravel pile and took a step forward. It was even bigger than I thought, towering, with broad shoulders and long arms that hung down almost to its knees. The hair swayed as it moved, and I could see the muscles bunching under it. It didn't make a sound now, but those eyes never left us. I slammed the truck into reverse and hit the gas. Gravel sprayed everywhere as we shot backward toward the road. My hands were slippery on the wheel, and I was breathing so fast I felt lightheaded. As we swung onto the county road, my boyfriend craned his neck to look back. "There's something running after us," he shouted. "It's big, and it's fast." I didn't dare look in the mirror. I just focused on the road, pushing the truck as hard as it would go. The engine groaned, but we picked up speed. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a dark shape moving parallel to us, keeping pace for a few seconds before it veered off into the trees. It was huge, like a shadow detaching itself from the night, and it moved with a speed that didn't seem possible for something that size. We didn't say much on the drive back to the house. The radio was still on, but I turned it off because the noise felt wrong. The silence was heavy, broken only by the rumble of the engine and our ragged breathing. I kept checking the rear-view mirror, expecting to see those eyes in the darkness, but there was nothing. The whole way, I could still smell that musky odor clinging to the air, like it had followed us. When we pulled into the driveway at home, I killed the engine and just sat there for a minute, my whole body trembling. My boyfriend reached over and put a hand on my arm, and his was shaking too. "What the hell was that?" he said, his voice low. I shook my head. "I don't know." And I didn't, I still don't. We went inside, and the house felt too bright, too normal. His mom was in the kitchen making coffee, and she asked if everything was okay. We just looked at each other, and I muttered something about seeing a weird animal. I couldn't bring myself to say more. That night I barely slept. Every creak of the house, every rustle outside made me jump. I kept replaying it in my head. The smell, the growl, those eyes, the way it leaned on the gravel pile like it was just waiting. The next day, they found that footprint and the crashing noises, but that's a story for another time. All I know is that one evening changed everything. I've never felt so small, so helpless. Sometimes, when I'm out on the farm alone, I get this prickling on the back of my neck, like I'm being watched. And I wonder if it's still out there. Story 4. Okay, so I've never written anything like this down before. I've typed it out and deleted it about 10 times now. It feels stupid putting it out into the world, but I also can't keep it bottled up anymore. I live alone, see? And there's no one to tell this to who wouldn't immediately think I've lost my mind. Maybe I have, but I know what I saw. I live in Washington, in this small, kind of crappy house I bought a few years back. It was cheap because it's basically on the edge of nowhere, backed right up against this dense, ancient forest, the kind of forest that's dark even at noon. I like the quiet, or I used to. That's why I moved here. I work from home, don't have many friends nearby, and I've always been fine with my own company. It was peaceful. The night it happened was a Tuesday, I'm pretty sure. It was just a normal, boring weeknight. Nothing special. It had rained earlier, that constant misty Washington rain, so everything outside was wet, and the air smelled like damp earth and pine. I'd been in bed since about 10, reading some thriller novel on my Kindle. The light was dim, just the glow from the screen and my small bedside lamp. My bedroom window faces the back of the property, straight into the wall of trees. I usually sleep with the curtains open a little because I like waking up with the natural light. It was open maybe 6 inches, just a vertical slice of the outside night. It must have been around 11:30. I remember because I just thought about turning off the light and trying to sleep. I was on my side, propped up on an elbow, scrolling to the next page, when I caught a movement in the very edge of my vision, through that gap in the curtains. I froze. Not out of fear yet, just alertness. You know that feeling when you're alone in the house and you hear a weird noise? Your whole body just locks up for a second, listening. It was like that. I thought it was probably a deer. We get a lot of them. They come right up to the tree line to nibble on the bushes, so I slowly, carefully turned my head to look, and I saw the eyes. They were deep red, like 2 burning coals. They were high up, way higher than a deer's eyes would be. They were just hanging there in the absolute blackness beyond my window, and they were reflecting the faint light from my room. That's what got me first. The reflection. It wasn't a glow from within. It was a reflection, like an animal's eyeshine. But this color, it was wrong. It was a color that didn't feel natural, a deep, bloody maroon. My heart, which had been ticking along normally, just dropped into my stomach and then immediately tried to hammer its way out of my chest. Thump, 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 so hard I could feel it in my throat. I didn't move. I don't think I even breathed. I just stared at those 2 red points in the dark. Then as my eyes adjusted, the shape around the eyes began to resolve from the shadows. It was massive. I'm not good with estimating height, but it had to be at least 8 feet tall. Its head was huge and sort of cone-shaped, but not pointy. It was just broad at the shoulders and tapered up, and it was covered in hair. Not fur like a bear. Hair. Long, shaggy, dark brown or black hair that was matted and wet from the rain. It looked heavy. Its shoulders were impossibly wide like a powerlifter's, and it had these long, thick arms that hung down past its knees. The silhouette was vaguely human, but everything about it was wrong. The proportions were off. The arms were too long. The torso was too thick. The head was set forward on its neck, and it was just standing there, still as a statue. It wasn't moving, wasn't making a sound. It was just looking at me. Through my window, from maybe 15 feet away. The most chilling part, the part that replays in my head over and over, was its head. It was tilted, just slightly, like a dog does when it's confused, or like a person does when they're studying something they don't quite understand. It was a curious tilt. That's what it was, a deep, unnerving curiosity. This wasn't some monster roaring and beating its chest. This was something intelligent, something that was observing me. The fear that hit me then wasn't like any fear I've ever felt. It wasn't the startled, jump-scare fear of almost getting in a car accident. This was a deep, primal, cellular terror. It was a coldness that started in my spine and spread out through my entire body, turning my arms and legs to ice. My skin prickled all over like a million tiny needles. I felt my bowels go loose and my stomach clench into a hard, nauseous knot. I was literally paralyzed. I couldn't have moved my finger if the house was on fire. I couldn't even blink. My eyes were dried out, glued open, staring back at this thing. My mind was screaming just one word over and over. No, no, no. This isn't real. This can't be real. But it was. The details were too sharp, too specific. The way the wet hair on its chest was clumped together in thick strands. The way the faint light from my room caught the bridge of its wide, flat nose. The sheer, overwhelming size of it, blocking out the trees behind it. It smelled. I hadn't noticed it at first, but a smell was seeping in through the closed window. A mix of wet dog, rotten meat, and something else. Something musky and foul, like a bog. We stayed like that for what felt like an hour. It was probably only 10 or 15 seconds, but time had completely stopped. It was just me and this thing in a silent, horrifying standoff. It was studying me. I could feel its gaze, a physical pressure. It was taking in every detail of my face, my room, my terrified expression. Then it moved. It didn't lunge. It didn't make a sound. It just stepped back. One smooth, silent step backwards, its huge foot sinking into the soft, wet ground without a squelch. It was unnaturally quiet for something so big. Then another step, and its form began to blend into the shadows of the trees. The red eyes never left mine. They didn't blink. They just held my gaze as it retreated. With a third step, it was mostly gone, its dark form dissolving into the deeper darkness of the forest. The red eyes were the last thing to disappear. They seemed to hang in the air for a second after the rest of it was gone, two glowing red embers in the night, and then they were just out, and I was alone. The spell broke. I gasped, a huge, ragged gulp of air, like I'd been drowning. I scrambled backward in my bed so fast, I tangled in the sheets and almost fell off the other side. My whole body was trembling, a violent, uncontrollable shake. I was drenched in a cold sweat. I fumbled for my phone on the nightstand, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hit the button to turn on the flashlight. I shone it at the window, my heart trying to burst through my ribs. The beam of light cut through the glass, illuminating the patch of grass and the first line of trees. Nothing, just rain-drenched grass and dark, silent pines. Empty. I didn't sleep for a second that night. Not 1 second. I sat up in bed, my back against the headboard, my knees pulled up to my chest, holding a kitchen knife I'd grabbed on my frantic, panicked run from the bedroom to the kitchen and back. I listened. Every single sound was amplified 1,000 times. The creak of the house settling was something moving in the attic. The wind rustling the leaves was its footsteps circling the house. The tap-tap of a branch against the roof was its knuckles rapping on the window. I kept getting up to check the windows, peering through the blinds, my heart in my throat every time. I'd see my own pale, terrified reflection and jump. The darkness outside felt alive, predatory. It felt like it was watching me back. The sun took forever to rise. When the first grey light of dawn finally filtered through the trees, it was the most profound relief I have ever felt in my life. I was exhausted, wrung out like a rag, but the terror was still there, just muted by the light. I went outside as soon as it was fully light. My legs were still wobbly. I walked over to the spot where it had been standing. The ground was soft from the rain, and there, clear as day, were footprints. They were huge, long, wider than my hand is long and deep. The shape was human-like, but the toes were splayed, and there was no arch. It was just a flat, long impression. I stared at them, and the full, horrifying reality of it all crashed down on me again. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't a hallucination. Something had been here, something massive. I went back inside, and I didn't leave the house for 2 days. I ordered groceries online. I called my boss and told him I had a bad flu. The following week, I went to the hardware store and bought everything I could think of. I installed 3 extra deadbolt locks on my front and back doors. I put up these blindingly bright motion sensor lights all around the perimeter of the house. I bought the best wireless security camera I could afford and mounted it on the corner of the roof, pointing right at the tree line where I saw it. That was over 6 months ago. The motion lights have gone off a few times. Always a deer or a raccoon, once a coyote. The camera has captured nothing but swaying branches and falling leaves. Nothing has reappeared. There have been no more footprints, no more sounds in the night that can't be explained. Life has gone back to normal on the surface. I work, I eat, I watch TV, but I am forever changed. I'm not the person I was before that night. That feeling of safety, of being secure in your own home, is gone. It was stolen from me. I still check the locks 3 times before bed. I still sleep with a weapon nearby. I never, ever leave my curtains open at night. And sometimes, when I'm lying in the dark, trying to fall asleep, I'll remember the tilt of its head, the quiet, intelligent curiosity in its stance. It wasn't trying to scare me. It wasn't being aggressive. It was just looking. And I can't shake the feeling that it wasn't a random encounter. I can't explain why I think that, but I do. It feels like it knew I was there. It feels like it was checking on me. And the most terrifying question, the one that keeps me up more than anything else, is why? And is it still out there, waiting, watching from the shadows between the trees, just curious? Story 5. That day, we woke up early. The sky was this pale grey, and the air was so cold it felt like tiny needles on my face every time I stepped outside. We'd been cooped up inside for a couple of days because of a fresh snowfall, and we were all itching to get out. My buddy's girlfriend, I'll just say her since I don't want to use names, suggested we take the snowmobiles out. Her family had a couple of old ones stored in a shed, and we'd been eyeing them since we got there. So, after a quick breakfast of toast and coffee, we bundled up in layers: thermal underwear, thick jackets, gloves, and those bulky snow pants that make you walk like a penguin. I remember my boots were a bit tight, and I kept feeling this pinch on my left heel, but I shrugged it off. We were too excited. We headed out around 10 in the morning. The snowmobile started up with this loud, sputtering roar, and we took off into the woods. The trails were pretty well marked, winding through tall pines heavy with snow. The sun was trying to break through the clouds, casting these weak golden rays that made the snow sparkle. It was beautiful, honestly. We were laughing and shouting over the noise of the engines, following the path deeper into the forest. I was riding one snowmobile, and my buddy was driving the other, with his girlfriend hanging on behind him. The cold wind was whipping past us, and I could feel the vibration of the machine under me, a steady rumble that made my hands tingle. After about an hour or so, we reached this lookout point the family had told us about. It was stunning, a clearing on a ridge that overlooked a frozen lake surrounded by mountains. We parked the snowmobiles and just stood there for a minute, taking it all in. The air was so crisp, it felt like we were breathing in pure ice. We'd brought a small cooler with some beers, and we cracked them open. They were so cold they almost hurt to drink, but it felt good. We were joking around, talking about nothing important, and for a while, everything felt perfect. I remember thinking how lucky we were to be out here, away from all the noise and stress of everyday life. But then, things started to get weird. It was subtle at first. The birds that had been chirping earlier went quiet, not like they flew away, just silence. I didn't think much of it at the time. Maybe it was the cold or something. We were finishing our beers when my buddy's girlfriend suddenly tensed up. She was staring into the trees behind us, her eyes wide. I followed her gaze, but I didn't see anything at first, just shadows and snow. "Did you see that?" she whispered, her voice shaky. She pointed toward a thick pine tree about 50 feet away. I saw a face, peeking out from behind the trunk. My buddy laughed it off at first. "Probably a deer or something," he said. But he was already walking toward the tree, curious. I stayed back with her, feeling a little uneasy. The forest felt different now, heavier, like the air was pressing down on us. I could hear the crunch of my buddy's boots in the snow as he moved closer. He was about 20 feet from the tree when he stopped dead in his tracks. That's when it happened. This massive thing stepped out from behind the tree. I mean, massive. It was like nothing I'd ever seen. Taller than any man, with black fur that looked almost shaggy, and right under its chin, there was this white patch like a little bib. Its face was round and cream-colored, with wide black eyes that didn't blink. They were just fixed on us. The body was muscular, bulging in a way that reminded me of the Hulk from the comics, but this was real, and it was standing right there. It let out this low hiss like air escaping from a tire, and the sound made the hairs on my arms stand up. For a second, none of us moved. We were frozen, just staring. Then my buddy stumbled backward, almost falling into the snow. "What the hell is that?" he yelled, and that broke the spell. Panic hit me like a physical blow. My heart started hammering in my chest, and I could feel this cold sweat breaking out under my layers. The creature took a step forward, and that's when we all scrambled for the snowmobiles. I don't even remember getting on mine. It was all a blur. I just remember fumbling with the keys, my hands shaking so bad I could barely turn the ignition. My buddy and his girlfriend were doing the same, and I heard her scream as his snowmobile roared to life. I glanced back and saw the Bigfoot, I know that's what it was now, starting to move toward us, but it wasn't walking. It dropped down on all fours and began to run, and it was fast, unbelievably fast. And then I saw others, at least 3 more of them coming out of the trees, all big and dark, moving in that same low, agile way. We took off down the trail, but they were right behind us. The snowmobiles were loud, but over the engine noise I could hear these weird monkey-like noises, chattering and screeching that echoed through the woods. It was terrifying. They were keeping up with us, easily, weaving between trees like it was nothing. I was driving as fast as I dared, but the trail was narrow and slippery, and I kept feeling the back end skid out. My buddy was ahead of me, and I could see his girlfriend clinging to him, her face white with fear. Then something whizzed past my ear. It was so close I felt the air move, and I ducked instinctively. A rock, maybe the size of my fist, hit the snow beside me. They were throwing things at us. I shouted to my buddy to go faster, but it was chaos. Another rock flew, and this one hit his girlfriend in the back. I heard her scream, this sharp pain sound that cut through everything else. She slumped forward, and my buddy yelled something I couldn't make out. I ducked lower, trying to make myself a smaller target, and more rocks came flying. One bounced off the side of my snowmobile with a dull thud. The chase felt like it went on forever, but it was probably only a few minutes. My arms were aching from gripping the handles so tight, and my legs were cramping from staying crouched. I could smell the exhaust mixed with the pine scent, and underneath it all, this weird, musky odor, like wet dog, and something else I can't describe. The Bigfoots, or whatever they were still right there, their dark forms darting through the trees beside the trail. I kept expecting one to leap out and grab us, but they stayed back, just throwing rocks and making those awful noises. Somehow we managed to gain a little distance. Maybe the trail opened up, or we hit a straightaway, but we started pulling ahead. I risked a look back and saw them slowing down, still following but falling behind. My buddy was leaning over his girlfriend, probably checking if she was okay, and I just focused on the path ahead. We didn't stop until we burst out of the woods and onto the road leading back to the cabin. The second we hit the pavement, I felt this rush of relief, but it was short-lived. We didn't slow down until we were pulling into the driveway, the snowmobile skidding to a halt in front of the house. We stumbled off, shaking and breathless. My buddy's girlfriend was crying, clutching her back where the rock had hit her. There was a bruise already forming, and she said it hurt to breathe. We helped her inside, and her family rushed over asking what happened. We tried to explain, but it came out in a jumble. Big creatures chasing us, rocks. They looked at us like we were crazy, but one of her uncles, who spent a lot of time in these woods, just nodded slowly and didn't say much. Later, when I was taking off my jacket in the mudroom, I noticed something on the sleeve, this foul yellow goo, sticky and smelly, like rotten eggs mixed with sweat. I have no idea how it got there, maybe from brushing against a tree or something during the chase, but it wasn't there before. I showed it to my buddy, and we just stared at it. Neither of us knew what to say. We stayed inside for the rest of the trip, too scared to go back out. The girlfriend recovered, but she had nightmares for weeks. Me, I still think about it all the time. The way those things moved, the sounds they made, the sheer size of them, it changed me. I used to laugh off Bigfoot stories, but not anymore. I've connected with other people who've had similar experiences, and it's made me appreciate how much we don't know about the world. But that day, that one day, it's like it's burned into my brain. I can still feel the cold, hear the hiss, and see those black eyes staring right at me, and that yellow goo. I never did figure out what it was. Story 6. It was a Tuesday, I think. Yeah, a Tuesday. It had been a hot, muggy day, the kind where the air feels like a wet blanket even after the sun goes down. It was around 10 at night. I was inside watching some dumb show on TV when the power flickered and went out for a second. It came right back on, but it must have tripped the circuit for the living room lamps. I was sitting in the dark. My main flashlight, a big heavy-duty one, was in the shed out back. I groaned about it, but I needed light, so I decided to go get it. I remember pulling on my old sneakers by the door, not even bothering to tie them. The back porch light was on, one of those motion sensor deals, and it cast a weak yellow circle on the steps and a little bit of the lawn. Beyond that, it was just pitch black. I started down the wooden steps, my hand on the railing. The wood was still warm from the day's heat. I was about halfway down, maybe 4 steps from the bottom, when I heard it. It wasn't a loud sound. At first it was just a rustling, a kind of heavy shifting noise coming from the direction of my vegetable garden. The garden is maybe 40 feet from the back steps, off to the left. I have a few motion lights out there too, meant to scare off deer and raccoons. One of them was on, lighting up the patch of tomatoes and corn. My first thought, my absolute first, was that my neighbor's damn cow had gotten out again. Old man Miller's fence is always breaking, and his big black Angus sometimes wanders over. I felt a spike of irritation. That thing would trample everything. I stopped on the steps, squinting into the semi-darkness beyond the porch light. The motion light over the garden was illuminating the top halves of the tomato cages and the corn stalks, and I saw something big moving there. It was a dark shape, hulking and low. But as I stared, my brain trying to make sense of the shadows, I realized it wasn't low to the ground. It was hunched over, its back was massive, and it was upright. The irritation vanished, replaced by a cold trickle of confusion. What the hell is that? A person, maybe a drunk from the road, but we're miles from the main road. No one just wanders back here. I stood frozen on the steps, my grip tightening on the railing. The thing was rustling around in the tomato plants. I could hear the dry, snapping sound of stems breaking, and then I heard the breathing. It was a heavy, wet, rhythmic sound, like a large dog panting, but deeper, much deeper. A huff, huff, huff. It was methodical, not panicked. It was just browsing. The porch light was on me, but I was mostly in shadow. The garden light was on it. I could see its shoulders, huge and rounded, rising above the 4-foot-tall tomato cages. The hair on its back was dark, a matted brown, but where the light hit it, I could see patches of a grayish color, like an old, grizzled animal. It moved with a slow, powerful deliberation. It wasn't fumbling around. It knew what it was doing. It reached down with one arm. And I say arm because it wasn't a paw, the shape was all wrong, and I saw a hand, dark and indistinct, close around something in the plants. There was a crisp snap as it broke off a tomato, I assume, and then a wet crunching sound as it ate. It was just standing in my garden eating my tomatoes. My heart was starting to hammer against my ribs. This wasn't right. This wasn't a cow, wasn't a bear, wasn't a person. The proportions were all wrong. The legs were too thick, the back too broad. The sheer size of it was making my skin crawl. I should have run. Every instinct was screaming at me to get back inside and lock the door, but I was paralyzed. I just watched. Then, the motion light over the garden timed out. The darkness that rushed in was absolute. The only light now was the weak yellow glow from the porch behind me, which only reached about 10 feet in front of the steps. The garden was a pool of blackness. The rustling stopped. The heavy breathing stopped. The silence was worse than the sounds. It was a thick, waiting silence. I held my own breath, my ears straining. I could hear the blood pounding in my head. And then I heard the slow, deliberate crunch of a footstep in the dry soil. It was turning. It was turning toward me. I felt a jolt of pure, undiluted fear shoot down my spine. My legs felt like water. The motion light on the porch was still on, illuminating me. I was a perfect target on those steps. It took a step forward, out of the deep shadow of the garden and into the very edge of the porch light's reach, and that's when I saw its face. It was covered in the same dark, matted hair, but shorter around the eyes and mouth. The nose was flat, almost pushed into its face. The eyes... God, the eyes. They weren't glowing or red like in the movies. They were just dark, deep-set pits, but they caught the light in a way that made them look wet and solid, like chunks of obsidian. Its head was slightly pointed at the top, not like an alien, but like like a muscular cone. It wasn't a mask, it was a living face, and it was looking right at me. The terror of that moment is something I can't properly put into words. It wasn't just fear, it was a primal, gut-level understanding that I was looking at something that wasn't supposed to exist, something that was far more powerful than me, and it was aware of me. We locked eyes. It couldn't have been for more than 2 or 3 seconds, but it felt like an hour. Its expression didn't change. It wasn't angry, or curious, or threatening. It was just blank. An ancient, empty kind of blankness. In that frozen moment, I saw its full height. It straightened up just a little, and I swear it was over 7 feet tall. Its chest was like a barrel, impossibly wide, and its legs were like tree trunks. The fur was a mix of dark brown and those grizzled grey patches, especially around its massive shoulders and chest. Then it moved. It didn't run. It didn't snarl. It just took a few swift, ground-eating strides toward the back fence. The fence is a 4-foot-high wire mesh thing, just to keep the rabbits out. This thing didn't climb it. It didn't vault it. It stepped over it, like I would step over a puddle. One long, powerful leg went over, then the other, and it didn't even touch the top wire. It was that tall, that effortless, and then it was gone. It just melted into the tree line. I didn't hear a crash of branches or running footsteps. 1 second it was there, crossing the fence, and the next, the woods had swallowed it whole. The silence rushed back in. I don't know how long I stood there, shaking. My whole body was trembling uncontrollably. My knuckles were white where I was gripping the railing. I finally managed to stumble back up the steps, fumble with the back door, and get inside. I locked the deadbolt, my hands shaking so bad I could barely turn the key. I spent the rest of the night on the couch with every light in the house on, staring at the back door, jumping at every little sound the house made. I didn't sleep. When the sun finally came up, the world looked normal again. The birds were chirping. It was another hot, humid Indiana morning. It felt like the whole thing must have been a dream, a weird panic attack brought on by the dark and my own imagination. I had to check. I had to know. I walked out to the garden, my heart still thumping. The evidence was everywhere. A whole section of my tomato plants was smashed flat. not eaten, just trampled. Stalks were broken and pushed into the dirt. Over in the corn, several ears were torn off, not picked neatly. They were ripped away, the husks shredded, and the cobs were half-eaten, big teeth marks gouged into the kernels. The ground was a mess of churned-up soil. And then I saw the footprints. They started in the middle of the garden and led in a straight line toward the fence. They were huge. I wear a size 12 shoe, and I put my foot next to one of them. My foot looked like a child's. These things had to be 14, maybe 15 inches long. They were wide, splayed, with 5 distinct toe impressions. The shape was human-like, but not human. The arch was different, flatter, and the depth. Whoever or whatever made them was immensely heavy. The prints sank deep into the soft earth. I followed them to the fence. On the other side, in the soft leaf litter of the woods, I found one more perfect print before the trail disappeared on the harder ground. Seeing those prints made everything real. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't my imagination. Something had been in my garden, something massive and bipedal that shouldn't exist. And that's when I remembered the chicken coop. This was about 2 years ago. I had a small flock, just 6 hens. One morning, I went out and the coop was a wreck. The wire on the run was pulled away from the posts, not cut, but pulled, like something with immense strength had just yanked it loose. The door to the coop itself was splintered. There were feathers everywhere, but no blood, no bodies. The chickens were just gone, and in the mud around the coop, there were large, strange footprints. I'd written it off as a particularly determined and strong coyote, or maybe a stray dog. I was pissed about the chickens, but I rebuilt the coop and never got more. Now standing there looking at these new, identical footprints, a cold certainty settled in my gut. It was the same thing. It had been here before. It took my chickens, and last night it came back for my vegetables. I never got my flashlight from the shed that night. I didn't go back out after dark for weeks. I installed more motion lights, the super bright LED ones, and I got a big dog, a nervous German shepherd who barks at everything. But sometimes, on still, hot nights, I'll be lying in bed and I'll hear something. A branch snap, a weird huffing sound carried on the wind, and I'll freeze, my heart seizing up, remembering those dark, wet eyes looking at me from the edge of the light. I saw it. I know what I saw, and I have no idea what it was, or why it was here, or if it's still out there. I just know it was real. Story 7. It was one of those thick, heavy summer days in the late 70s. I want to say it was 1976, but it might have been 77. The years blend after a while, you know, but the day itself, that's burned into me. It was Arkansas, and we were staying in this little cabin my uncle owned way out in the sticks. I mean, way out. The nearest town was a 20-minute drive on a dirt road, and the only neighbors were a family friend, Old Man Henderson, who lived about a mile through the woods. The air was so still and hot that afternoon it felt like you were breathing soup. I was maybe 14, 15 years old, buzzing with that restless energy you get when you're stuck on vacation with your parents and there's nothing to do. My dad was snoring on the porch swing, and my mom was inside, probably reading one of her thick romance novels with the fan pointed right at her face. I was bored out of my skull. I'd decided to go see if my friend, the Henderson's boy, was around. We weren't super close or anything, but he had a dirt bike, and that was enough of a reason to trek over there. To get to their place, you had to cross this old county road that nobody used anymore. It was more of a wide dirt path, really, grown over with weeds in the middle. I remember the feel of the gravel under my sneakers, crunching softly. The sun was high, beating down, and the cicadas were screaming in the trees. It was so loud that buzzing. I was just walking, not thinking about anything, just kicking a stone, looking forward to maybe getting a ride on that bike. I was about halfway across the road when I don't know what made me do it. A gut feeling, a shift in the air, something. But I glanced to my left and I froze. My whole body just locked up. It was like an electric shock went through me, from my feet right up to the top of my head. There, maybe 100 yards down the road, moving along the tree line, was this figure. It was tall, so unbelievably tall. My brain couldn't process it at first. It was walking right alongside this old barbed wire fence, the kind that's strung between wooden posts. It was moving from my left to my right, east to west, just strolling, and it was white. Not like a person's skin, not pale, but this bright, almost silvery white. It looked like it was made of light but solid, real. My first thought wasn't even fear. It was pure, simple confusion. What is that? It didn't move like a person. Its legs were too long, its arms just swinging. But there was a weird grace to it, a smoothness, and it was completely silent. The cicadas were still screaming, but this thing made no sound, no rustle of leaves, no snap of a twig. Nothing. That silence, in the middle of all that insect noise, was more terrifying than any sound it could have made. My heart started hammering in my chest, a frantic, painful thumping against my ribs. I dropped. I didn't think. I just dropped, scrambling behind this big, rotten tree stump that was right on the edge of the road. It was full of ants and smelled like wet earth and decay. I pressed myself against it, the rough bark digging into my forearms. I was praying it hadn't seen me. I peeked around the side of the stump, my breath caught in my throat. I could taste the dirt and the fear, this metallic sort of taste. It was still walking. It never once turned its head. I never saw its face. I don't even know if it had a face in the way we think of one. Its head was just a part of this long, lean form, and that's when the real terror started to sink in, the kind that makes your stomach feel like it's full of ice water. I was looking at the fence. It was a standard 4-foot-tall barbed wire fence. I'd helped my dad fix a section of one just like it a week before. I knew exactly how tall it was, and this thing, its hip was level with the top wire. Its hip, the top of the fence, was hitting it mid-thigh. My brain did the math without me asking it to. If the fence was 4 feet tall and the top wire was at its thigh, this thing was at least 8 feet tall, maybe 10. It wasn't bulky, not like the Bigfoot pictures you see with the huge round shoulders. This was lean, wiry, like a basketball player, but stretched out, elongated. The hair... God, the hair is what I remember most clearly. It wasn't shaggy, it wasn't fur, not really. It was like a coat of this silvery white hair, and it lay flat against its body. The sun hit it and it reflected. It didn't shine like glass, it was duller than that. It looked exactly like crumpled up aluminum foil, the kind your mum uses to wrap a baked potato. That same texture, that same weird crinkled metallic sheen, it covered its whole body. It just kept walking, one long leg in front of the other, moving with this impossible silence along that fence line. It was so casual. It wasn't in a hurry. It wasn't hunting. It was just traveling, like it was on its way to somewhere, and this was just part of the route. I crouched behind that stump for what felt like an hour, but it was probably less than a minute. My knees were screaming from being bent, and I had a cramp in my calf, but I was too scared to move, too scared to even shift my weight. I was just frozen there, watching this impossible thing move through my world. Then it reached the end of the fence line where the trees started to get thicker. It didn't pause. It didn't look around. It just took one step past the last fence post and melted into the shadows of the woods. 1 second it was there, this brilliant white shape against the green and brown of the forest, and the next it was gone, vanished. The trees just swallowed it up without a sound. I stayed there, pressed against that stump, for a long time after it was gone. I don't know how long. The cicadas were still going. The sun was still beating down. Everything was exactly the same as it had been 2 minutes before, but everything was also completely different. The world felt wrong, broken. My legs were trembling so bad I could barely stand up. When I finally did, my jeans were stained with damp earth and bits of rotten wood. I stood there in the middle of that dirt road, just staring at the spot where it had disappeared. The fence was still there, the trees were still there, but that thing was gone. My mind was racing, trying to find a logical explanation. A man in a suit out here, in the middle of nowhere, Arkansas, in the middle of a scorching summer day, and that height, that silence, the way it moved? No, it wasn't a man. I knew it wasn't a man. I looked at the fence again, really looked at it. I walked over to it, my steps unsteady. I reached out and touched the top strand of barbed wire. It was warm from the sun. I stood next to the fence post. The top wire came up to my chest. I tried to imagine something so tall that this wire would only come up to its thigh. The image made me feel dizzy and sick. I abandoned my plan to go to the Hendersons. I turned around and ran all the way back to the cabin. I wasn't thinking about being quiet anymore. I was crashing through the undergrowth, my heart pounding, not from the run, but from the sheer, gut-clenching terror that was only now fully hitting me. I burst onto the porch, panting, sweaty, my face probably white as a sheet. My dad stirred on the swing. "You're back early," he mumbled, half asleep. I just stood there, gasping for air, wanting to tell him, to scream it. "Dad, I just saw a monster." But the words wouldn't come out. What would I even say? How could I describe it? A 10-foot tall, aluminum foil-covered thing that walked without making a sound. He'd think I'd gotten heat stroke. He'd laugh. My mum would worry and make me lie down. So I didn't say anything. I just went inside, past my mum, who looked up from her book with a faint smile. And I went into the little bedroom I was using and shut the door. I sat on the edge of the bed and I just stared at the wall. The rest of the day was a blur. I went through the motions at dinner, pushing my food around my plate. My parents asked if I was feeling okay. I just said I was tired from the heat. I went to bed early, but I didn't sleep. I lay there in the dark, listening to the night sounds, the crickets, the owls, the rustle of leaves in the wind. Every sound was that thing moving. Every shadow in the moonlit room was its long white form. The next day, the need to talk to someone, to just say the words out loud to another person, was overwhelming. I went to see my friend. I didn't run this time. I walked slowly, my eyes constantly scanning the trees, my ears straining for any sound that was out of place. I crossed that dirt road again, and my skin crawled. I looked at the tree stump, and I looked at the spot where it had vanished. When I got to my friend's house, we went out to his shed to look at his bike. It was cool and dark in there, smelling of gasoline and grease. I leaned against a workbench, and I just came out with it. I didn't lead up to it. I just said, "I saw something weird yesterday." He was tinkering with the bike chain. "Yeah? Like what?" I told him. I told him everything. The height, the color, the aluminum foil hair, the silence. I kept my voice low, even though we were alone. Saying it out loud made it feel both more real and more insane. He stopped what he was doing and looked at me. He didn't laugh. He didn't call me crazy. He just listened, his face serious. When I was done, he was quiet for a minute. "That's messed up," he finally said. "You sure it wasn't like a trick of the light?" "I was right there," I said, my voice shaky. "I saw it as clear as I see you now. It was taller than your dad's truck." He whistled low. "A white Bigfoot? I've never heard of that. All the stories are about the big, brown, hairy ones." And that was the thing. Back then, you didn't hear about white Bigfoots. There was no internet to go and search for weird stories. You had the Patterson film and a few blurry photos in cheap magazines, and that was it. They were always brown or black, not silver, not white. I felt completely alone with it. My friend believed me, I think, but he didn't have any answers. Nobody did. We never talked about it again after that day. I went home a week later, back to the city, back to my normal life. But I never forgot. I'm an old man now, and I still think about it. I've read every account I can find since the internet came along. I've seen the stories about the white squatch or the spirit Bigfoot, and a cold chill goes down my spine every time. It sounds like what I saw, but I'll never know for sure. I'll never know what it was, why it was there, or why it was white. I just know that on a hot summer day in the 70s, I was in the wrong place at the right time, and I saw something that shouldn't exist move through the world with a silence that was more terrifying than any roar. And sometimes, when I'm out in the woods even now, I find myself looking at the fences, measuring them with my eyes, and wondering what else is walking through the trees just out of sight. Story 8. Okay, so I've never really shared this with anyone outside of a few close friends. And even then, I don't think I've ever told the whole thing start to finish, without skipping parts, because it still messes me up to think about it. But here goes. I'm Shannon, and this happened back in Ashtabula, Ohio when I was a kid. Specifically, I want to talk about one day in the summer of 2005. I was 14 by then, and it was a Saturday. I remember that much because we didn't have school, and me and my friends had been planning this airsoft thing for weeks. That morning I woke up early, like around 7 o'clock, because the sun was already streaming through my window, and it was hot and humid even then. Summer in Ohio can be brutal, but that day felt heavier, like the air was thick and still, like something was waiting. I didn't think much of it at the time. Just figured it was going to be another lazy day, messing around in the woods behind my grandparents' house. Their place is right near Connie Creek, and the woods there are dense, kind of dark even in daylight, with lots of thick brush and old trees that creak in the wind. I'd spent a lot of time out there since I was little, playing soldier or just exploring, so I thought I knew every inch of it. But that day, I learned I didn't. I met up with my friends around 9 in the morning. There were 3 of us, me and 2 other guys from school. We didn't use names much back then, just called each other by nicknames or whatever. But for this, I'll just say my friends. We were all into airsoft, so we had our gear, those plastic BB guns that sting like hell if you get hit, and we'd packed some snacks and water bottles in a backpack. We headed into the woods from my grandparents' backyard, following this narrow trail that cuts through the trees. The ground was soft from recent rains, and you could smell that damp earth mixed with pine. It's a smell I've always liked, but that day it felt off, like it was masking something else. We started playing around, splitting up and trying to ambush each other. It was fun at first, laughing and shouting, but after a while things got quiet. Not like we stopped talking, but the woods themselves went silent. No birds chirping, no squirrels rustling, nothing. I remember feeling a chill, even though it was hot, and I kept glancing over my shoulder. My friends noticed it too. One of them said, "Dude, it's too quiet." And we all kind of nodded, but we didn't want to look scared, so we kept going. We'd been out for maybe an hour or 2 when we decided to take a break on this wider trail that we used a lot. It was around 11 o'clock, I'd guess, because the sun was high and beating down, making sweat trickle down my back. We were sitting on a fallen log, passing around a water bottle, when one of my friends pointed at the ground. "What the hell is that?" he said. I looked down, and there it was. A footprint, but not like any animal I'd ever seen. It was huge, bare, and sunk deep into the mud. I mean, this thing was massive. Later, we measured it with a stick and guessed it was around 13 to 15 inches long. The toes were clear, kind of spread out, and the heel was deep, like whatever made it was heavy, really heavy. The mud around it was wet and fresh, so it hadn't been there long. My heart started pounding right away because I'd seen something in these woods before, back in the winter of 2004, when I was 13. I'd been playing with binoculars and spotted this tall, dark, reddish-colored thing watching me from about 70 yards away. It just stood there, silent, and then vanished. I never forgot that, and seeing this footprint brought it all back. We all crouched down to look at it, and nobody said anything for a minute. The air felt even heavier, like it was pressing in on us. I could feel the hair on my arms standing up, and my throat got dry. One of my friends whispered, "That's not a bear." And he was right. Bears don't leave prints like that around here. This was different. It looked almost human, but way bigger, and the shape was wrong, like the toes were too long or something. I reached out and touched the edge of the print. The mud was cool and squishy, and I pulled my hand back fast like I'd been burned. We stood up slowly, and that's when we heard it. A rustling sound from deeper in the woods, not too far away. It wasn't loud at first, just leaves crunching, but then it got closer. We all froze, staring into the trees where the sound was coming from. The brush was thick there, all tangled vines and bushes, so we couldn't see much, but whatever it was big. The rustling turned into snapping branches, like something was pushing through without caring about noise. Then came the footsteps. God, I'll never forget that sound. It wasn't like a person walking. It was heavier, slower, and each step made the ground vibrate. I could feel it through my shoes, a low thud that seemed to shake the earth under us. My legs felt weak, and I grabbed onto my friend's arm without thinking. We were all breathing fast, and I could hear my own heart thumping in my ears. The footsteps kept coming, getting louder, and then there was this crash, like a tree limb breaking, but way bigger, like something had slammed into it. That's when we lost it. We didn't say a word. We just turned and ran. I've never run so fast in my life. We bolted down the trail, back toward my grandparents' house, not looking back. The air felt cold against my face, and my lungs burned, but I didn't slow down. Behind us, the crashes kept coming, getting closer, and I could still feel those vibrations in the ground, like whatever it was chasing us. Branches whipped at my arms and face, but I didn't care. I just kept running, my feet slipping on the muddy path. I remember tripping once and scrambling back up, my hands covered in dirt, and my friend yelling, "Go, go, go!" We didn't stop until we burst out of the woods into the backyard, panting and sweating, our clothes soaked. We collapsed on the grass, trying to catch our breath, and I looked back at the tree line. Nothing was there, but the silence had returned, and it felt even more eerie now. My hands were shaking, and I could still feel that vibration in my bones, like my body remembered the fear. We sat there for what felt like forever, not talking, just staring at the woods, like we expected something to come out. Eventually we went inside, and my grandma asked why we were so dirty and out of breath. We made up some story about playing too rough, but I don't think she bought it. The rest of the day, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Every noise made me jump, and I kept looking out the window, half expecting to see that thing standing there again. That was the day I realized whatever was in those woods wasn't just some animal. It was something else, something that knew we were there and didn't like it. We never went back to that spot, and over the years I had a few other weird experiences, but that summer day stuck with me the most. The woods got logged later, so I guess it's gone now, but sometimes I still dream about those footsteps and wake up in a cold sweat. I don't know what it was, and I probably never will, but that fear, it's real and it's still there, like a shadow I can't shake. Story 9. It was one of those perfect spring days, the kind that makes you forget about the long, grey winter. The air was cool, but the sun was warm on my skin, and everything smelled like wet earth and new growth. My husband and I were out near Big Walnut Creek, like we'd been so many times before. Mushroom hunting is our thing. It's quiet, it gets us outside, and there's that little thrill of the hunt. Morels are tricky. They blend right in with the dead leaves, and finding one feels like winning a tiny, delicious prize. We'd gotten a later start than we wanted, so we decided to split up to cover more ground. It made sense. He went east, following the creek bank, and I headed west up a slight incline into a thicker part of the woods. We had our phones, but service is spotty out there, so we just agreed to meet back at the truck in a couple of hours. We've done this 100 times, it never felt risky. For the first 40 minutes or so, it was just a normal, kind of frustrating day. I'd find a spot that looked perfect, a cluster of dead elms, a damp area near a runoff. But the leaf litter would be all kicked up, boot prints everywhere. Other hunters had already been through, and recently. It was annoying. You get your hopes up, you get that focus, and then you see you've been beat to the punch. I remember feeling a little defeated, thinking we'd wasted the trip. I pushed a little deeper, away from the more obvious paths. The ground got softer, more uneven. The sunlight was dappled through the new canopy, and it was quieter back there. The usual bird chatter seemed more distant. I was so focused on the ground, my eyes scanning back and forth, looking for that telltale honeycomb pattern. I saw a fallen log, half rotted and covered in moss, and I thought, okay, this looks promising. Nobody's checked this. I bent down, one knee in the damp leaves, and pushed some ferns aside, and there it was, a single perfect morel tucked right up against the base of the log. I felt that little jolt of victory. I reached for it, my fingers brushing the cool, spongy cap, and that's when I heard it. Breathing. It wasn't my own. It was deep, steady, like someone taking slow, deliberate breaths right behind me. The sound was so close, so clear. It felt like the air itself was vibrating with it. I froze. Completely. My hand was still hovering over the mushroom, every muscle in my body locked up. My first thought wasn't even fear. It was just pure, stupid confusion. Is that my husband? Is he messing with me? But that made no sense. He was way on the other side of our starting point, and this breathing was heavier, deeper than a man's. It had a wet rumbling quality to it, like air moving through a massive chest. I held my own breath, listening. The sound didn't stop. In and out. In and out. It was coming from the other side of the log. I was crouched on one side, and whatever it was on the other. My heart started to hammer against my ribs, a frantic, painful thumping. I had to see, I had to know. I couldn't just stay there frozen. Slowly, so slowly my joints ached. I started to straighten up. I rose from my crouch, my eyes lifting over the top of the fallen log, and I saw it. About 50 feet away, standing between two younger oak trees, was a figure. My brain tried to process it as a man, a really, really big man. But the pieces didn't fit. It was tall, so tall. Its head was well above the lowest branches of the oaks. It was broad-shouldered, impossibly wide through the chest and back, and it was covered, and I mean completely covered, in hair, dark hair. Not fur like a bear, but long, shaggy hair. In the shadows it looked black, but where a patch of sun hit its shoulder, I could see it was a deep, rusty brown. It wasn't moving. It was just standing there, facing me, and it was watching me. That was the worst part, the awareness in its posture. It wasn't just an animal that happened to be there. It was looking at me. I could feel its gaze. I felt naked, exposed, like it was seeing right through me, understanding exactly what I was, and that I was terrified. Its face, it wasn't a bear's face. It was flatter. I couldn't make out clear features from that distance, just a dark patch where a face should be. But I had the overwhelming impression of intelligence. This wasn't a dumb beast. Time just stopped. I was locked in that stare. My breath was caught in my throat. My fingers were tingling. I could feel the cold sweat beading on my back under my jacket. The forest had gone completely silent. No birds, no squirrels, nothing. It was just me and it, and that low, steady breathing sound. My husband. I had to get to my husband. The thought broke through the panic like a crack of lightning. I tore my eyes away from the thing and glanced quickly in the direction I thought he'd be. It was just a flick of my eyes, less than a second. When I looked back, it had moved. It hadn't run. It hadn't charged. It had simply shifted. It was now standing directly behind the thicker of the two oak trees, using the trunk to hide most of its body. But it wasn't hiding well. A massive, rounded shoulder and part of its arm was still visible, the dark hair stark against the grey bark. It was peeking, it was hiding, but it was still watching me. The deliberate nature of that movement, the understanding of concealment, sent a fresh, icy wave of terror through me. This wasn't an instinct, this was a choice. That's when I broke. I didn't think. I didn't plan. A sound tore out of my throat, half scream, half gasp. "John!" I shrieked my husband's name, my voice shrill and unfamiliar. "John!" I spun around and I ran. I didn't look back, I just ran. I crashed through underbrush, my feet slipping on the wet leaves. Branches whipped at my face and arms, stinging like fire. I didn't feel it. All I felt was the raw animal panic. My heart wasn't just pounding anymore. It felt like it was going to explode. My lungs burned, screaming for air I couldn't seem to pull in. I could hear my own frantic footfalls and my ragged breathing. But underneath it, in the back of my mind, I was listening for something else, for the sound of it coming after me, for the sound of heavy, pounding footsteps crashing through the woods behind me. I don't know how I didn't trip and break my ankle. The ground was a mess of roots and holes. I just remember seeing the sunlight getting brighter ahead, meaning I was nearing the edge of the thicker woods and getting closer to the clearing where we'd parked the truck. That was my only goal. The truck, the metal, the doors that locked. I burst out of the tree line. The truck was there, maybe 100 yards away across a field of wild grass. It was the most beautiful sight I'd ever seen. I kept running, my legs feeling like jelly, my chest on fire. I fumbled in my pocket for the keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip them. I hit the unlock button and yanked the passenger door open, practically throwing myself inside. I slammed the door shut and hit the lock, then scrambled over the center console to hit the master lock for all the doors. Then I just sat there, collapsed against the seat. I was trembling uncontrollably, my whole body shaking in great racking shudders. I was gasping, trying to catch my breath, but it was like my lungs had forgotten how to work. I wrapped my arms around myself, but it didn't help. The shaking was coming from deep inside my bones. I stared out the windshield, my eyes darting across the edge of the woods, expecting to see it step out at any second. It felt like an eternity, but it was probably only 5 or 6 minutes before I saw my husband jogging out of the trees. He looked confused, a little annoyed. He saw me in the truck and his expression changed. He walked faster, then ran the last few feet. He pulled on the door handle, and when it was locked, he tapped on the window. "Hey, unlock the door. What's wrong?" he said, his voice muffled by the glass. I fumbled for the button and unlocked it. He climbed into the driver's seat and looked at me. He saw the state I was in. The wild eyes, the shaking, the leaves stuck in my hair, the scratch on my cheek from a branch. "Honey, what happened? Are you hurt? Did you fall?" I just shook my head, my teeth chattering. There was a man," I stammered out. The words felt stupid and inadequate. But it wasn't a man. It was huge, covered in hair. It was watching me. He stared at me, his face pale. He didn't laugh. He didn't tell me I was being silly. He just stared. "I heard it," he said, his voice quiet. "I thought it was you." My blood went cold. What? What did you hear?" "Footsteps," he said. "Heavy ones, not like yours, and sounds like mumbling, a low, grumbling sound. I kept calling your name, thinking you were messing around, trying to scare me, but it never answered. It just stopped when I got close. I figured you'd circled back to the truck." We just sat there in silence for a minute, the engine still off. The reality of what he just said settled over me, heavier and colder than my own fear. I hadn't just imagined it. He'd heard it too. He'd heard its footsteps. He'd heard it mumbling. We didn't say another word. He started the truck and we got out of there. We didn't report it to anyone. Who would we even call? The police? To say what? We saw a big, hairy thing in the woods. They'd think we were crazy. I replayed it in my head for days, for weeks. That moment of looking up and seeing it, the way it stood so still. The intelligence in its stance, the way it deliberately hid behind that tree, still watching me, the sound of its breathing, the utter, profound silence of the woods around it. I still go mushroom hunting with my husband, but I never, ever go alone, and I never let us split up. I stick to him like glue. If we go near Big Walnut Creek, my heart is in my throat the whole time. I'm constantly scanning the trees, not for morels, but for a tall, dark shape watching me from the shadows. The terror isn't just the memory of what I saw, it's the knowledge that it saw me. It looked right at me with a kind of understanding I can't explain, and then it chose to hide, to watch, to let me go. I don't know what it was. I don't have a name for it. All I know is that it was there, and for one long, horrible moment on a mild spring afternoon, it knew I was there too. Story 10. It was a clear night, with a full moon hanging in the sky like a big, bright coin. The moonlight was so strong that I didn't need my headlights to see the road ahead. I'd turned them off to save on battery and just enjoy the peace. The air was cool, not cold, but enough to make me keep the windows up most of the time. I remember the dashboard lights casting a soft glow inside the car, and the radio was quiet, except for the occasional crackle of static. I'd been on duty for a few hours already, and everything felt normal. I was just cruising along, keeping an eye out for anything out of the ordinary, but not really expecting to find anything. Then, for some reason, I decided to flip my headlights on. Maybe it was a gut feeling or just habit kicking in. The second the beams cut through the darkness, I saw it. Right there in the middle of the road, maybe 50 feet ahead, was this thing. It was in mid-stride, like it had been moving fast and I'd caught it by surprise. My heart just dropped into my stomach. I mean, 1 second I'm relaxed and the next I'm staring at something that shouldn't exist. It was huge. Taller than any man I'd ever seen, easily 8 feet tall and covered in what looked like light brown fur. The fur wasn't matted or messy. It was kind of shaggy, almost like it had been groomed, but wild, you know? The way it moved was what got me most. It wasn't clumsy or slow, it was agile, fast, like a large human but covered in hair, and it moved with this eerie grace that made my skin crawl. Its arms were long, swinging as it ran, and its legs were powerful. I could see the muscles bunching up under that fur even from where I was. The road there had a deep ditch on the side, about 14 to 16 feet across, and without breaking stride, this thing leaped over it. I'm not talking about a jump where it struggles or barely makes it. It cleared that ditch like it was nothing, like stepping over a puddle. The motion was so fluid, so effortless, that it didn't even seem to slow down. It landed on the other side and kept running, disappearing into the trees in a matter of seconds. But in those few seconds, I got a good look at it, and I'll never forget the details. Its face, I couldn't see it clearly because it was turned away, but I caught a glimpse of a profile that was almost human, but not quite. The head was large and the shoulders were broad, making it look top-heavy, but it moved with a balance that was unnerving. The fur on its back was lighter in some spots, almost tan where the moonlight hit it, and I remember thinking how quiet it was. There was no sound when it landed, no rustling or snapping of branches. It just vanished into the woods like it had never been there. But the real terror didn't hit me until after it was gone. When I first saw it in the headlights, my brain didn't process it right away. It was like my mind was trying to fit it into a box, a bear maybe, or a big dog, but nothing fit. Bears don't move like that, and they sure as hell don't stand 8 feet tall and leap over ditches without a sound. The shock was physical. I felt it like a jolt through my whole body. My hands tightened on the steering wheel, and I could feel my knuckles turning white. My breath caught in my throat, and for a second, I couldn't even move. I just sat there staring at the spot where it had been, with the headlights still shining on the empty road. The car was still rolling slowly, and I had to force myself to hit the brakes. The squeak of the pads was loud in the sudden silence. I remember my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears, like a drum beat drowning out everything else. I was sweating, but it was a cold sweat that made me shiver. I kept looking around, half expecting it to come back, but the woods were dark and quiet. The only sound was the hum of the engine and my own ragged breathing. I didn't get out of the car. Hell no. My training kicked in, and I knew I should radio it in, but I was too shaken to even reach for the mic right away. Instead, I just sat there for what felt like forever, maybe 5 or 10 minutes in reality, but it seemed like an eternity. I kept replaying it in my head, the way it moved, the height, the fur. It wasn't a bear, it wasn't a person in a costume. It was something else, something I'd never seen before, and something I never wanted to see again. Eventually, I got my act together and grabbed the radio. My voice was shaky when I called it in, and I had to repeat myself a couple of times. I told them what I saw, but I kept it brief because I didn't want to sound like I was losing it. The dispatcher sounded calm, but I could hear the skepticism in their voice. They told me to head back to the station and report to the chief, so I did. I drove the rest of the way with my headlights on full blast, my eyes darting to every shadow, every movement in the trees, every little noise made me jump. The creak of the car, the wind rustling leaves, it all felt like a threat. When I got back to the station, it was late, maybe around 2 in the morning. The chief was there, an older guy who'd been in the service for years. He had this no-nonsense attitude, but he listened to me without interrupting. I told him everything, from turning on the headlights to watching it leap over the ditch. I described the creature in as much detail as I could. The light brown fur, the 8-foot height, the way it moved like a large human, but covered in hair. I even mentioned how it didn't make a sound when it landed, which freaked me out more than anything. He didn't laugh or dismiss me outright. Instead, he got quiet for a minute, then told me not to log it. He said something like, "Son, sometimes things happen out there that don't need to be on paper. It'll just raise questions we can't answer." He advised me to forget about it, to chalk it up to a long night and an overactive imagination. But I could tell, by the look in his eyes, that he'd heard similar stories before. Or maybe he'd seen something himself. He didn't elaborate, and I didn't push it. I just nodded and left his office, feeling more confused than ever. The rest of that night, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing it in my mind. That moment when the headlights hit it, and it was just there, frozen for a split second before it leaped. The image was burned into my brain. I went home as the sun was coming up, but I didn't feel any relief. The daylight made everything seem normal again, but I knew what I'd seen. I spent the whole day jumpy, looking over my shoulder, and when I tried to tell my wife about it, I couldn't find the words. How do you explain something like that without sounding crazy? Over the years, I've thought about it a lot. I've read stories online, accounts from other people who've seen similar things, and it's comforting in a way to know I'm not alone. But it doesn't change the fact that I have no answers. What was that thing? Where did it come from? Why was it on the base? I'll never know. And that's the part that still haunts me. Not just the fear of that night, but the uncertainty. It's like a puzzle piece that doesn't fit anywhere, and I'm left with this gap in my understanding of the world. Even now, decades later, if I'm out in the woods or driving at night, I sometimes get that same chill. I'll catch a movement in the corner of my eye, and for a second my heart will race. But I never saw anything like it again. That one encounter was enough to last a lifetime. I guess some things are just meant to be mysteries, and all you can do is live with them. Story 11. I was 12 years old, and it was one of those late summer mornings in Pennsylvania where the air already feels heavy and warm, even before the sun gets too high. I remember it was a Saturday, because I didn't have school, and my mom was making breakfast in the kitchen. The smell of bacon and eggs was filling the house, and I was just lounging around in my pajamas, probably thinking about cartoons or something dumb like that. Our house was out in the country, not super isolated, but we had neighbors a good distance away. And behind our property was this thick stretch of woods that went on for miles. I'd played in those woods a bunch of times, building forts and exploring, so I thought I knew them pretty well. But that day, everything changed. I was sitting at the kitchen table, fiddling with the spoon, when my mum let out this sharp gasp. She was standing by the window over the sink, where she always cooked because she liked to look out at the backyard. Her hands were covered in flour from making biscuits and she froze, just staring out. I asked her what was wrong, but she didn't answer right away. Then she whispered, "What in the world is that?" and pointed. I jumped up and rushed over to the window, my heart already starting to beat faster because of the way she sounded. Not scared exactly, but shocked, like she'd seen something impossible. I followed her gaze and I saw it too. About 100 yards out, near the edge of our neighbor's property, there was this large brown figure moving. It was big, way bigger than a person, and it was walking from the neighbor's field toward the woods behind our house. The way it moved was weird. Not like a bear or a deer, but kind of smooth and powerful, with long strides. It was covered in dark brown hair, and it was just disappearing into the tree line when I got a good look. My mum said, "Did you see that?" And I nodded, but I couldn't speak. I felt this rush of curiosity, like I had to know what it was. Without even thinking, I bolted out the back door, barefoot and still in my pajamas. The grass was wet with dew, and it felt cold under my feet as I ran across the yard. I didn't stop to put shoes on or anything. I just had to get to where I'd seen it go, into the woods. Our backyard sloped down toward the trees, and I sprinted as fast as I could, probably about 75 yards, until I reached the spot where the terrain dropped off into a creek bed. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and pine, and I could hear the creek gurgling below. My heart was pounding in my ears and I was breathing hard, but I pushed on, scrambling down the slight embankment. When I got to the creek bed, I stopped and looked around. The trees were dense here, with lots of underbrush, and the sunlight filtered through in patches. At first, I didn't see anything, just the usual woodsy stuff. Rocks, leaves, the creek winding away. But then, about 50 yards ahead, I saw it. The creature was standing there, partly hidden by some trees, but I could see it clearly. It was huge, between 6 and 7 feet tall, with broad shoulders and this dark, matted fur that looked almost black in the shadows. It had stopped moving, and for a second I thought it hadn't noticed me, but then it turned its head, and it looked right at me. Time seemed to slow down. Its face was dark, with a broad nose and deep-set eyes that weren't angry or wild, but just calm. It stared at me for what felt like forever, probably only a few seconds. But it was long enough to sear into my memory. I couldn't move. I was frozen in place, my feet rooted to the ground. My skin felt cold, and I had this prickling sensation all over, like tiny needles. I remember thinking, this isn't real, but it was. The creature's eyes held mine, and there was an intelligence in them that scared me more than anything. It wasn't like looking at an animal. It was like it was studying me, taking me in. Then, without any hurry, it turned away and started walking again. Its strides were long and effortless, like it was just taking a stroll, and it moved around a bend in the creek bed and vanished. As soon as it was out of sight, the spell broke and I could move again. I stumbled backward, my legs shaking, and I almost fell into the creek. I turned and scrambled back up the embankment, my heart hammering so hard I thought it would burst. I didn't look back. I just ran as fast as I could toward the house, the wet grass slapping against my ankles. When I burst into the kitchen, my mom was still at the window, her face pale. She asked me what I saw, and I could barely get the words out. I was panting, and my voice was shaky. I told her about the creature, how it looked at me, and how big it was. She didn't say much, just hugged me, and said we should tell my dad when he got back from his errands. The rest of the morning was a blur. I kept replaying the moment in my head, the way it turned, the calm in its eyes, the sheer size of it. I felt jittery, like I'd had too much caffeine, and I couldn't sit still. My dad came home around noon, and we told him everything. He's a practical guy, works in construction, so at first he thought we were exaggerating or had seen a bear. But we insisted, and he agreed to come out with me to look around. We went back to the creek bed, and this time I put on shoes and brought a stick just in case. The sun was higher now, and the woods felt different. still and quiet, like everything was holding its breath. We walked to the spot where I'd seen the creature, and that's when we found them. Footprints. They were in the soft, muddy earth near the creek, and they were huge. I mean, way bigger than any human foot. Each print was deep, like whatever made it was heavy, and they had a distinct shape. A wide heel and toes that splayed out, almost like a gorilla's foot, but even broader. My dad knelt down to look, and his expression changed from skeptical to serious. He measured one with his hand. It was easily 1.5 feet long. He muttered, "What the hell?" under his breath, and we both just stared. There were a series of them leading away from where the creature had been, following the creek bed, and then disappearing into thicker brush where the ground was harder. We didn't follow them far. My dad said we should head back, and I was relieved. The whole time we were out there, I had this feeling of being watched, like eyes were on us from the trees. It was a creepy, crawling sensation on the back of my neck, and I kept glancing around, but I never saw anything. When we got home, my dad tried to play it down, saying it was probably a bear or something, but I could tell he was unsettled. He even called the neighbors later to ask if they'd seen anything, but no one had. The rest of the day, I couldn't shake the fear. Every noise made me jump, and I kept looking out the windows, half expecting to see it again. As evening came, the woods grew darker, and I started hearing sounds, low, guttural grunts that seemed to come from deep in the trees. My dad said it was probably bobcats, which are common around there, but I'd heard bobcats before, and this was different. It was deeper, more resonant, and it sent chills down my spine. I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, and every time I heard that sound, my whole body tensed up. I felt like it was out there, waiting, and that direct gaze from earlier kept haunting me. I didn't sleep much, and when I did, I had dreams about those calm, intelligent eyes. That day ended with me knowing deep down that what I saw was real, and that it wasn't just passing through. The footprints proved it, and the feeling of being watched stuck with me. Even now, years later, I can close my eyes and see it turning to look at me, and I get that same cold fear. I never went back into those woods alone after that, and I still wonder what it was and why it was there. But I'll never forget that one morning when my ordinary world turned upside down and I came face to face with something I still can't explain. Story 12. I had my 2 Walker hounds with me, Duke and Bear. They were the best dogs I've ever owned. Fearless, loyal, and smart as whips. We'd been out since late afternoon, hoping to bag a raccoon or 2. The sun had set hours ago, and the moon was just a sliver, so it was pitch black except for my flashlight beam cutting through the trees. The water was ankle-deep everywhere from recent rains, and every step made a soft, splashing sound that usually felt comforting, like the swamp was breathing with me. But that night, it just added to the unease that built up later. We'd been tracking for a couple hours when the dogs picked up a scent. Duke started baying first, then Bear joined in, and they took off through the water, their barks echoing in the stillness. I followed, my boots sinking into the mud, the cold seeping through my jeans. It wasn't long before they had a raccoon treed, a big old sycamore with branches hanging low over the water. I could see its eyes glowing in my light, and the dogs were going crazy, jumping and barking at the base of the tree. I leashed them up quick, not wanting them to hurt themselves or scare the coon off before I could take a shot. But honestly, I was feeling rushed. Something about the darkness felt heavier than usual, like the trees were closing in. I got the dogs secured, their leads tight in my hand, and we started heading back toward my truck. It was a good mile or so through that flooded area, and I was moving slow, careful not to slip on submerged roots. The water was icy, and my feet were numb, but I was used to it. What I wasn't used to was the silence that fell after the dogs quieted down. Normally, the swamp is full of sounds, frogs croaking, owls hooting, the rustle of critters in the brush. But that night, It got dead quiet, like everything had just stopped breathing. That's when I heard it. Slow, deliberate footsteps behind me. Not the light patter of a deer or the scamper of a possum, but something heavy, like a person walking through water, but slower, more deliberate. At first, I thought it might be another hunter, maybe one of my buddies playing a trick, but that didn't make sense. No one else was supposed to be out there that night. I called out, "Hey, who's there?" My voice sounded small in the emptiness, and there was no reply. Just those footsteps, keeping pace with me, maybe 20 yards back. I tightened my grip on the leashes, and that's when the smell hit me. It was awful, like rot and wet animal, mixed with something else I can't even describe, like old meat left out in the rain, or a carcass bloated with decay. It made my stomach turn, and I could see the dogs reacting too. Duke and Bear, who never backed down from anything, started whimpering low in their throats. They pressed against my legs, their bodies trembling, and that scared me more than anything. These dogs had faced down bears and wild hogs without flinching, but now they were acting like pups, scared of thunder. I swung around with my flashlight, my heart hammering in my chest. The beam caught something massive, maybe 8 or 9 feet tall, standing in the water about 30 feet away. It was covered in dark, wet hair that clung to its body like it had been submerged, and its eyes, they were amber, glowing in the light, not like an animal's reflective eyes, but like they had their own light source. It was just standing there, staring at me, and then it let out this deep growl that rumbled through the air, vibrating in my bones. The sound wasn't like anything I'd ever heard, not a bear, not a big cat, but something primal and angry. Before I could process it, the creature hissed, a sharp, guttural noise, and then it flung water at me with one of its arms, not like splashing, but like it was throwing it with purpose, and the water hit me in the face, cold and slimy. The dogs went berserk, barking and straining at their leashes, and that broke me out of my shock. I didn't think, I just ran. I turned and started splashing through the swamp, dragging the dogs with me, my boots slipping on the muddy bottom. I could hear it behind me, those heavy footsteps following, not running but moving fast, like it was keeping up without effort. The disorientation was the worst part. I've hunted these woods my whole life, but in that panic, everything looked alien. Trees I knew seemed twisted. The water felt deeper and my flashlight beam bounced around, making shadows dance like living things. I was gasping for air, my lungs burning from the cold and fear, and I could feel the creature's presence like a weight on my back. Every few seconds, I'd glance over my shoulder and I could see its outline in the darkness, those amber eyes fixed on me. It never got closer, but it never fell behind either, just staying there like it was herding me. The dogs were still barking, but it was different now. Not the excited bark of the hunt, but a terrified, defensive sound. Duke kept looking back, his fur bristling, and Bear was trying to pull me faster. We stumbled through a thick patch of cypress knees, and I almost fell, but I kept going, my mind racing. What was this thing? Why was it following me? I thought about stopping, maybe facing it, but the fear was too raw. I'd never been so scared in my life, not when I had a close call with a rattlesnake, not when I got lost as a kid. This was a deep, primal terror that made my hands shake and my vision blur. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a few minutes, I heard a moaning call from behind me. It started low and rose in pitch, echoing across the bayou, and then it faded away. The footsteps stopped, and the presence I'd felt just vanished. I kept running, not daring to look back until I burst out of the timberland and saw my truck parked on the gravel road ahead. I fumbled with the keys, my hands trembling so bad I could barely get the door open, and I shoved the dogs into the cab before jumping in myself. I locked the doors and sat there, breathing heavy, the engine roaring to life as I peeled out of there. I didn't go home right away. I drove to a gas station a few miles away and just sat in the parking lot trying to calm down. The dogs were quiet now, huddled together on the seat, and I could still smell that foul stench on my clothes. I checked myself in the mirror. My face was wet from the water it flung, and my eyes were wide with shock. I knew I had to tell someone, but who would believe me? I thought about my hunting partners, guys I'd known for years, but I couldn't bring myself to say it. They'd think I'd lost my mind or been drinking or something. A week or so later, I ran into an old hunter from Doddridge, a man named Joe, who'd been around these parts forever. He had stories about things in the woods that didn't make sense, and I figured if anyone would understand, it was him. I told him what happened, stumbling over the words, and he just listened, nodding slowly. When I finished, he said, "Son, you saw something that ain't in the books. Best leave it be." He didn't act surprised, and that somehow made it worse because it meant I wasn't the only one. I never went back to that area near Mercer Bayou, sold my hunting gear not long after, and stuck to fishing in safer spots. But that night left a mark on me. Even now, years later, I'll wake up in a cold sweat, dreaming of those amber eyes and that rotten smell, the terror of that moment, the way the water felt when it hit me, the sound of that growl, the way my dogs pressed close. It's all burned into my memory. I don't know what it was, and I don't want to know. Some things are better left unexplained, and that creature, whatever it was, is one of them. I just thank God I made it out of there, and I pray I never have to face anything like it again. Story 13. We headed out to this spot in Indiana, not too far from where we lived, but it felt like the middle of nowhere. The area was mostly woods with a huge swamp bordering one side, and there was this old logging road that cut through it. It was the kind of place that felt wild and untouched, even though people had been logging there years before. The air was cool and damp, with that earthy smell of wet leaves and mud that hangs around swamps. We got there just as the sun was starting to dip below the trees, so it was that weird twilight time where everything looks a little grey and shadows start to stretch out long. We had 3 hounds with us. My dad's friend owned them, and he was really proud of those dogs. They were seasoned hunters, he'd always say, because they'd chased down bears and boars back in Tennessee without ever backing down. Big, muscular dogs with deep barks, and this confidence that made you feel safe around them. Their names weren't anything fancy, just Red, Duke, and Jack, but they knew their job and did it well. We let them out of the truck, and they immediately started sniffing around, tails wagging, ready to go. My dad's friend gave us a quick rundown. We'd spread out a bit along the logging road, keep quiet, and let the dogs do their thing. The plan was to maybe bag a deer or something, but mostly it was about being out there together. For the first little while, everything felt normal. The dogs were barking in that steady, focused way they do when they're on a trail. Not too loud, just enough to let us know they were working. We could hear them moving through the underbrush, rustling leaves and snapping twigs, but it was all part of the hunt. I remember standing there with my dad, his friend a few yards away, and the kid sticking close to his dad. The woods were alive with sounds, crickets chirping, frogs croaking from the swamp, the occasional hoot of an owl. It was peaceful in a way, but there was this underlying tension, because it was getting darker fast. Then, maybe half an hour in, things started to change. The dogs' barking shifted from that steady rhythm to something higher pitched, almost frantic. At first, I thought they'd just picked up a strong scent, but it didn't sound right. It was more like yelping, the kind of noise a dog makes when it's scared or hurt. My dad glanced over at his friend, and I could see the confusion on his face. We all stopped moving, listening harder. That's when we heard it, something big moving through the woods. Not like a deer or even a bear, because deer are light on their feet and bears can be noisy, but this was different. It was heavy, like something taking slow, deliberate steps, and it was accompanied by this low, rumbling sound that seemed to vibrate through the ground. I felt a chill run down my spine, and my heart started beating faster. The dog's yelping got even more intense, and then we heard this deep, heavy growl. It wasn't like any animal I'd ever heard. Not a dog, not a bear, nothing. It was deeper, almost guttural, and it echoed through the trees in a way that made the hair on my arms stand up. I remember looking at my dad, and his eyes were wide, his mouth slightly open. He whispered, "What the hell is that?" But none of us had an answer. The next part happened so fast, but it felt like it lasted forever. The dogs came tearing back toward us, and I mean they were running flat out, tails tucked between their legs, yelping like they were being chased by the devil himself. These were dogs that had faced down bears without flinching, and here they were, scared out of their minds. They didn't even slow down as they shot past us, heading straight for the truck. My dad's friend yelled something, but I couldn't make it out over the noise. Then my dad grabbed my arm, his grip tight, and said, "Run, now!" We didn't hesitate. We turned and bolted down the logging road, back toward where we'd parked the truck. The kid was crying, I could hear him whimpering behind me, and his dad was trying to keep him moving. I was running so hard my lungs burned and my legs felt like jelly. Behind us, we could hear it, whatever it was, crashing through the woods. It was loud, like trees were being snapped or pushed aside, and there was this rhythmic thumping sound, like something heavy hitting wood over and over. I didn't look back. I was too scared to. All I could think about was getting to the truck, getting somewhere safe. The logging road was rough, full of ruts and rocks, and I stumbled a couple times, but my dad kept pulling me along. The sounds behind us seemed to be getting closer, and I could feel this pressure in my ears, like the air was thickening around us. Every time I heard another crack or thud, my stomach would clench, and I'd run even harder. I remember the cold sweat soaking through my shirt, and the way my breath came in ragged gasps. It was pitch black by then, with only a sliver of moon peeking through the clouds, so we were mostly running blind, trusting that we were going the right way. When we finally reached the truck, I almost collapsed. The dogs were already there, huddled in their boxes in the back of the pickup, and they were shaking uncontrollably. I mean, full-body tremors, like they'd been electrocuted. Red, the biggest one, was whining softly, and Duke had his head tucked down, not even looking at us. Jack was panting so hard, I thought he might pass out. My dad's friend fumbled with the keys, his hands shaking so much he could barely get the door open. We piled into the cab, all four of us squeezed in, and he started the engine without a word. As we drove away, I looked back through the rear window, but I couldn't see anything except darkness. The sounds had stopped, but the silence was almost worse because it felt like something was still out there, watching. Nobody spoke for a long time. The kid was sobbing quietly, and my dad just stared straight ahead, his knuckles white where he gripped the seat. I kept thinking about those dogs, how fearless they were supposed to be, and how whatever we'd encountered had terrified them so deeply they'd run back to the truck on their own. They'd never done that before, not even when they'd cornered a boar that charged them. We drove for what felt like hours, but it was probably only 20 minutes before we hit the main road. The whole way I couldn't stop shaking, and my heart was still pounding in my chest. When we finally got home, my dad's friend helped unload the dogs, and they were still trembling, refusing to leave their boxes until we coaxed them out. We didn't talk about it much afterward. It was like if we didn't say anything, it might not be real, but we never went back to that spot, and my dad sold his hunting gear not long after that. To this day, I have no idea what that was. I've tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a bear or a moose, or even some kind of machinery from the logging days, but nothing fits. The growl was too deep, the movement too deliberate, and the dog's reaction was just too extreme. Sometimes, when I'm lying in bed at night, I'll hear a noise outside and my heart will skip a beat, and I'll remember that feeling of something big and unknown chasing us through the dark. It's one of those things that sticks with you, you know, like a shadow you can't shake, and no matter how many years go by, it still feels just as real. Story 14. Okay, so I've never really shared this with anyone before. Not in full detail, anyway. But it's been eating at me for over a decade now, and I figure if I'm going to put it out there, it should be here, where people might actually get it. This happened back in April of 2010, when I was fishing with my Uncle David in the mountains of west central Arkansas. He'd retired out there a couple years before, mostly because he loved the quiet. The creeks were always full of brook trout, and the forests were so thick you could forget the rest of the world existed. That day, we were on some private land he had permission to fish on, a spot he'd been going to for years. It was overcast, the kind of grey sky that makes everything feel damp and close, and the air had that cool, earthy smell you only get deep in the woods after a light rain. We started early, just after sunrise, casting our lines into this narrow stream that cut through a valley surrounded by pine and oak trees. The water was clear and cold, rushing over rocks and fallen branches. I remember the sound of it was almost hypnotic, just this constant, gentle roar that made it easy to zone out. Uncle David was a few feet downstream from me, focused on his line, and I was lost in the rhythm of casting and reeling, not thinking about much beyond whether I'd hook a decent-sized trout. The peacefulness of it all was what I loved. No phones, no noise, just the two of us and the forest. We'd been out there for a couple of hours, maybe longer, and hadn't caught much beyond a few small fish we threw back. I was starting to feel a little bored, my mind wandering to what we might have for lunch later, when this huge splash came from upstream. It wasn't like a fish jumping or a rock falling in. It was loud, like something heavy had dropped into the water, and it echoed off the trees. I froze for a second, rod still in my hand, and looked over at Uncle David. He'd heard it too. His head was cocked, and he was staring up the stream with this puzzled look on his face. Before either of us could say anything, there was another sound. Closer this time, like something big moving through the water, sloshing and displacing a lot of it. My heart started beating faster right away. I'm not usually a jumpy person, but out there, in the middle of nowhere, any unusual noise puts you on edge. Uncle David gestured for me to be quiet, and we both set our rods down on the bank, careful not to make any noise ourselves. The air felt heavier suddenly, like the temperature had dropped a few degrees, and I could feel the hair on my arms standing up. We started moving slowly up the bank, stepping over roots and wet leaves, trying to see what had caused the commotion. The stream curved ahead, and the trees were thicker there, casting deep shadows even though it was still morning. As we got closer to the bend, I could hear more splashing, but it was different now, not random but purposeful, like something was wading through the water. My mouth went dry, and I remember thinking it might be a bear or maybe a deer, though it sounded too big for that. Uncle David was ahead of me, moving cautiously, and he suddenly stopped dead in his tracks. His body went rigid, and he slowly raised a hand to signal me to stop too. I crept up beside him, peering around a thick pine tree, and that's when I saw it. Standing in the middle of the stream, about 50 feet away, was this massive, hairy creature. I'm not exaggerating when I say it was over 7.5 feet tall, towering, with broad shoulders and thick muscles that bulged under its reddish-brown hair. The hair was matted and wet, clinging to its body like it had just come out of the water, and it was so long in places that it almost looked like a shaggy coat. Its arms were huge, hanging down past its knees, and its legs were like tree trunks. But what got me, what really stuck with me, were its eyes. They were dark, deep-set, and even from that distance I could feel them looking right at us, not angry or aggressive, just intense, like it was sizing us up. For a few seconds, none of us moved. I was frozen, my breath caught in my throat, and I could feel my heart hammering against my ribs. It was like every instinct in my body was screaming at me to run, but I couldn't make my legs work. The creature stood there, water dripping off it, and then it started climbing the bank. The bank was steep and slick with mud. but it scaled it in seconds, using its long arms to pull itself up without any effort. It moved so smoothly, so powerfully, that it didn't even seem to struggle. Just a few quick motions, and it was on solid ground. Once it was out of the water, it paused and turned its head in our direction. That's when the fear really set in. I could see its face more clearly now. A heavy brow, a flat nose, and those dark eyes that seemed to see right through me. It didn't make a sound, no growl or grunt, just stood there, staring. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead, and my hands were trembling so bad I had to clench them into fists to keep them still. Uncle David was beside me, and I could hear his shallow breathing. He looked pale, like he'd seen a ghost. Then, without warning, the creature turned away from us and headed toward a slope on the other side of the stream. The slope was about 15 feet high, almost vertical in places, covered in loose soil and rocks. I thought for sure it would struggle or slip, but it didn't. It took 3 long strides, just 3, and scaled the whole thing without using its hands. Its feet dug into the mud, and it moved with this unnatural grace, like it was part mountain goat. At the top, it paused again, glancing back over its shoulder right at us. That look lasted only a second, but it felt like an eternity. Then it turned and disappeared into the trees, swallowed up by the forest so completely that it was like it had never been there. The silence that followed was deafening. For a long moment neither of us moved or spoke. I could still hear the stream gurgling, but everything else was quiet. No birds, no wind, just this heavy stillness. My legs felt weak, and I had to lean against a tree to steady myself. Uncle David finally let out a shaky breath and whispered, "What in God's name was that?" I didn't have an answer. All I could do was shake my head, my mind racing with what we'd just seen. After a few minutes, when we were sure it was gone, we slowly made our way over to where it had been. The mud on the bank was churned up, and there, clear as day, were footprints. They were huge, at least 20 inches long, with 5 distinct toes and a deep impression that showed how heavy it must have been. I knelt down to look at one, and my hand trembled as I traced the outline. The prints led from the water up the slope, and we could see where it had climbed, deep gouges in the earth from its steps. Uncle David took a few photos with his old camera, but his hands were shaking so much the pictures came out blurry. We didn't talk much on the way back to the truck. Every sound in the forest made me jump. A twig snapping, a leaf rustling, and I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see those dark eyes watching us again. The hike out felt twice as long as the hike in, and the whole time I couldn't shake the image of that thing moving so effortlessly. It wasn't just its size that scared me, it was the way it carried itself. Like it belonged there in a way we never could. When we got back to Uncle David's cabin, we sat at the kitchen table for a long time, just staring at each other. We both knew what we'd seen, but neither of us wanted to say it out loud. He finally broke the silence and said we shouldn't tell anyone. Not the cops, not the fish and game people, no one. He was worried they'd think we were crazy or drunk. And honestly, I agreed. Who would believe us? We had no proof beyond some blurry photos and a story that sounded like something out of a bad movie. But the thing is, I've replayed that day in my head 1,000 times since then. I've gone over every detail, the way the creature emerged from the water, the way it looked at us, the way it scaled that slope like it was nothing. I've tried to rationalize it, to tell myself it was a bear or some kind of prank, but I know what I saw. Bears don't move like that. And they don't have eyes that seem to hold so much intelligence. Sometimes, when I'm alone in the woods, or even just walking my dog at night, I'll get this chill down my spine, and I'll remember that intense gaze. It's like it's burned into my memory, and no matter how much time passes, I can't shake the feeling that we weren't supposed to see what we saw. To this day, I still don't know what it was, and I doubt I ever will. All I have is the memory, and the knowledge that out there in those mountains, there are things that don't fit into any neat explanation. And every time I think about it, I'm right back on that bank, frozen in terror, watching something that shouldn't exist walk away like it owned the place. Story 15. Okay, so I'm Mark, from Nebraska, and this happened back in the fall of 1995. I'd been going through a rough patch in my life. Nothing major, just the usual stuff that piles up, you know. Work was draining me, and I felt like I needed to get away from everything for a while. So I decided to take my Harley-Davidson on a solo trip north, starting from home and heading up through Yellowstone National Park, then Glacier National Park, and eventually into Canada. I'd packed light, just a tent, a sleeping bag, and my Smith & Wesson .44 Magnum revolver for peace of mind. I've always been into the outdoors, grew up trapping and hunting, so I figured I could handle myself. At the Canadian border, I had to check the gun, which was a bit unnerving, but rules are rules. The day it happened, I was riding on one of those highways. I think it was Highway 93, cutting through Idaho or Montana. The details get fuzzy when you're on the road for days. It was one of those crisp autumn mornings where the air smells like pine and damp earth, and the sun was just starting to warm things up. I'd been on the bike for hours, the engine rumbling beneath me, and I was loving the solitude. No one around for miles, just me and the open road, with forests stretching out on either side like an endless green carpet. I remember thinking how small I felt in all that wilderness, but in a good way, like I was part of something bigger. Around midday, I started feeling the need to take a leak. You know how it is on long rides. You drink water to stay hydrated, and eventually nature calls. I spotted a gravel pull-off area up ahead, just a small patch off the shoulder where other travelers had probably stopped before. I eased the Harley onto the gravel, the tires crunching under the weight, and killed the engine. The sudden silence was almost deafening after hours of roaring wind and engine noise. I stretched my legs, feeling the stiffness from sitting so long, and looked around. The forest here was dense, what folks call a dark timber forest. Tall pines and firs packed close together, with shadows pooling between the trees like black water. I didn't want to just go right by the road. It felt too exposed, and I'd seen enough littered spots from other people to know I didn't want to add to that. So I decided to hike up a dirt bank that led into the woods. The bank was steep, covered in loose gravel and pine needles, and I had to watch my step to avoid slipping. My boots sank into the soft earth as I climbed, and I could smell that familiar forest scent, damp soil, rotting leaves, and a hint of something else I couldn't quite place at first. I walked in about 40 or 50 yards, far enough that the road was just a distant hum behind me, and found a spot behind a large fallen log. It seemed private enough, with thick bushes around, and I started to relieve myself. That's when it hit me, this overpowering, musky odor. It wasn't like anything I'd ever smelled before, and I've been around animals my whole life. Not skunk, not elk, not even bear, which has a distinct rankness. This was heavier, almost oily, like wet fur mixed with something ancient and wild. It clung to the back of my throat, and I froze midstream, my heart suddenly pounding. I've always been alert in the woods, thanks to my trapping days, so I started sniffing the air, trying to pinpoint where it was coming from. My eyes darted around, scanning the shadows, and that's when I saw movement out of the corner of my left eye. It was subtle at first, just a shift in the darkness between the trees, but it made the hairs on my arms stand up. I finished up quickly, my hands shaking as I zipped my pants and turned slowly to face where the movement had been. And that's when I saw it. A small creature peering over the top of a large log, maybe 20 feet away. Its eyes were what got me first. Huge, black and wide with terror, like it was just as scared as I was. The face was covered in dark, matted hair, and it looked like a tiny monkey. But my brain instantly screamed, Sasquatch, not the big hulking one you see in stories, but a young one, maybe the size of a small child. My breath caught in my chest, and I felt a cold sweat break out all over my body. I was unarmed, My revolver was back on the bike, locked away because of the border crossing, and for the first time in years, I felt utterly vulnerable. This wasn't some bear or coyote I could scare off. This was something else, something I'd only heard about in whispers. The creature didn't move, just stared at me with those panicked eyes, and I could see its little body trembling. It was hunched down, like it was trying to hide, and the musky smell was so strong now, it made my stomach churn. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to run, but another part was frozen, mesmerized by the sheer impossibility of what I was seeing. My mind raced through all the stories I'd ever heard about Bigfoot, how people laughed them off, but here it was, real and breathing right in front of me. I could hear the blood rushing in my ears, and my legs felt like jelly. I took a step back, slow and careful, not wanting to startle it. The forest seemed to close in around us, the trees looming taller, the shadows deepening. Every rustle of leaves or snap of a twig made me jump, but the creature stayed put, its eyes locked on mine. I kept backing away, one step at a time, my boots scraping against the forest floor. The distance felt immense, like I was moving through molasses, and I couldn't tear my eyes away from that log. I half expected it to charge or make a sound, but it just watched me, silent and still. The musky odor followed me, clinging to my clothes, and I could still taste it in the air. When I finally reached the edge of the trees and stumbled down the dirt bank, my heart was hammering so hard I thought it might burst. I scrambled onto my motorcycle, fumbling with the keys, my hands slick with sweat. I didn't look back until I was on the highway, the engine roaring to life, and even then, I kept glancing in my mirrors, half expecting to see something chasing me. The rest of that day is a blur. I rode for hours, not stopping until I found a crowded campsite miles away. I couldn't shake the feeling of those eyes on me, or that smell. It's been years since then, and I've never told many people about it because who would believe me? But that encounter solidified something in me, a belief that there are things out there we don't understand, things that hide in the shadows of places we think we know. And every time I smell something musky in the woods, my heart still skips a beat, and I remember that day like it was yesterday. I just can't explain it, and I doubt I ever will. Story 16. It was a Thursday, I remember, because I'd just gotten home from work around 5 in the afternoon. I work as a mechanic at a local garage, so my hands were still grimy, and I was tired but in that satisfied way after a long day. The sun was starting to dip, casting this orange glow over everything, and the air was warm and humid like it always is here. I let my dog, a big mutt named Buddy, out into the backyard to do his business while I cracked open a beer and just stood on the porch, watching the light fade. Buddy's usually pretty brave. He'll bark at anything from squirrels to the mailman. But that evening, he was acting a little off. He kept sniffing the air and whining low in his throat, like he was nervous about something. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe it was a raccoon or a possum lurking around. We get those all the time. But as it got darker, the noises started. Not the usual stuff. This was different. It was like something heavy was moving through the palm meadows, crunching leaves and snapping twigs in a way that felt too deliberate for a small animal. The sound would stop for a minute, then start up again, closer each time. I remember feeling this prickle on the back of my neck like someone was watching me. I shook it off, though. I'm not the kind of guy who spooks easily. I've lived here my whole life, spent plenty of nights camping in the woods, and I've never been one to believe in ghost stories or cryptids. But that night, it changed things. Around 7 o'clock, it was fully dark, and the noises were getting louder, like whatever it was had moved right up to the edge of the tree line. Buddy was glued to my side, whining and pressing against my legs. His ears were flat, and he kept staring into the darkness, his body tense. That's when I decided to check it out. I grabbed my heavy-duty flashlight from the kitchen drawer, the one I use for working on cars, and headed outside. The air felt thick, almost heavy, and the usual night sounds had gone quiet. No crickets, no frogs, just this eerie silence broken by those rustling noises. I walked slowly toward the palm meadows, my flashlight beam cutting through the dark. The grass was damp under my boots, and I could smell the wet earth and the faint scent of rotting leaves. Buddy stayed right behind me, his whines turning into soft growls. I kept telling myself it was probably a deer or a wild hog. We have those around here too. But something in my gut was screaming that it wasn't. My heart was starting to beat faster, and I could feel sweat trickling down my temples, even though the night was cool. Then I saw it. I swung the flashlight toward the trees, and the beam caught something tall and dark, standing between two palm trees. At first I thought it was a shadow or a trick of the light, but it didn't move like a shadow. It was solid, and it was huge, way taller than a man, with long, lanky arms that hung down almost to its knees. The fur, or whatever it was, looked brownish-black, matted and rough, and it seemed to absorb the light instead of reflecting it. But the eyes, that's what got me. They were amber-colored, like old whiskey, and they glowed in the flashlight beam, reflecting it back at me with this intense, almost intelligent stare. I froze. My breath caught in my throat, and for a second, I couldn't move at all. It was just standing there, completely still, watching me. Buddy let out this high-pitched whine and backed away, his tail tucked between his legs. He didn't bark or charge. He just retreated like he knew whatever that thing was. It was way out of his league. I've never seen him so scared. My own fear was like a cold fist squeezing my chest. I could feel my palms getting slick on the flashlight, and my legs felt weak, like they might buckle. The creature shifted slightly, and that's when I saw the lighter patch on its midsection, a sort of tan or grayish area that stood out against the darker fur. It was rough and patchy, like an old scar, or maybe just how its coat was. The movement was smooth, almost fluid, but it made no sound. No rustling, no crunching leaves, nothing. It was like it was part of the silence. I kept the flashlight trained on it, my hands shaking so bad the beam was jittering all over the place. I tried to tell myself it was a bear. Florida has black bears, and they can get big. But this was nothing like any bear I'd ever seen. Bears don't stand that upright, and they don't have arms that long, and their eyes don't glow like that. We stood there for what felt like forever, just staring at each other. I could hear my own heart pounding in my ears, a loud, frantic rhythm that drowned out everything else. My mouth was dry, and I had this urge to run, but my feet were rooted to the spot. The creature didn't make a sound, no growl, no huff, nothing. It just watched me with those amber eyes, and I got this overwhelming sense that it was curious, maybe even assessing me. But there was also something primal and dangerous about it, like it could lunge at any second. Then, in the blink of an eye, it was gone. One moment it was there, and the next, it had vanished into the darkness behind the trees. It didn't run or crash away. It just melted into the shadows, like it was never there. The sudden absence was almost worse than seeing it. The silence felt heavier, and the night seemed to close in around me. Buddy started barking then, a frantic, scared sound, but he still didn't move from my side. My first thought was to get inside, but something in me snapped. I wasn't going to let this thing, whatever it was, linger near my home. I ran back to the house, my legs finally cooperating, and I grabbed my rifle from the closet. It's a .30-06 I use for hunting, and I keep it loaded for emergencies. I also snatched up a spotlight I have for checking the property at night. My hands were trembling so hard I could barely load the rifle, but I managed it. Buddy followed me, still whining, but I told him to stay inside. I didn't want him getting hurt. I went back out, the spotlight in one hand and the rifle in the other. The backyard was dead quiet again, but now it felt menacing. Every shadow seemed to move, and every little noise made me jump. I swept the spotlight across the palm meadows, the beam cutting through the trees and undergrowth. I could see where the grass was flattened in spots, like something heavy had been walking through it, but there were no clear tracks, just vague impressions. I walked along the edge of the tree line, my finger resting near the trigger, my heart still racing. The air smelled different now, musky, almost earthy, with a hint of something foul like rotten meat. I don't know if that was from the creature or just my imagination, but it made my stomach turn. I spent what felt like an hour out there, searching every inch I could. I checked behind trees, in thickets, even waded a little way into the meadows, but I found nothing, no sign of the thing, no more noises, nothing. It was like it had never existed. The only evidence was the memory burned into my brain and the way Buddy was still cowering inside when I got back. I stood there for a long time, just staring into the darkness, feeling this deep, cold dread settle in my bones. I'd always laughed off stories about the skunk ape, you know, Florida's version of Bigfoot. I thought it was just folklore, something tourists talked about. But now I wasn't so sure. I went back inside and locked the doors. Even though I knew locks probably wouldn't matter against something that big, I sat at the kitchen table with the rifle across my lap, listening to the night. Buddy curled up at my feet, still shaking. I couldn't sleep. Every little sound made me tense up. I kept replaying what I'd seen in my head. The tall figure, the long arms, those glowing eyes, the lighter patch on its belly. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how wrong it was. It wasn't a bear, wasn't a person in a costume, wasn't anything I could explain. The way it moved, the silence, the sheer size of it, it was something else entirely. The rest of the night dragged on. I must have checked the windows a dozen times, peering out into the dark, but I never saw anything again. By the time the sun started to come up, I was exhausted, both physically and mentally. The fear had faded into this numb, unsettled feeling that stayed with me ever since. I went outside at first light to look for tracks or any other signs, but the ground was too hard and grassy to hold clear prints. All I found was that musky smell lingering in one spot near where I'd seen it, but even that faded as the day warmed up. That was months ago, and I still think about it every day. I've started reading up on skunk ape accounts from other people in Florida, and a lot of them describe similar things. Tall, hairy figures with glowing eyes, that same silent watching. I used to roll my eyes at those stories, but now I get it. Whatever I saw that night was real, and it was massive, and it was way too close to my home. I've set up motion sensors and cameras around the property since then, but I've never caught anything. Part of me is relieved, but part of me is still waiting, always on edge when I'm outside after dark. I don't talk about this with many people because I know how it sounds, but writing it down here, it helps, I guess. I just needed to share it with someone who might understand. The memory of that thing, standing there in the darkness, watching me with those amber eyes, it's something I'll never forget, and I still can't explain what it was. Story 17. Okay, so I've been sitting on this for a while, and I don't really know how to start, but I need to get it out. It's one of those things that just sticks with you, you know? Like it pops into my head at random times, and I get this chill down my spine. I've never told this to anyone outside my friends who were there, because honestly, who'd believe me? But I figure if I put it here, maybe someone else has seen something similar, or at least I can just, I don't know, get it off my chest. So this happened last fall. I think it was October, but I'm bad with dates. We'd gone to an NFL game out of state. I'm a huge football fan, and my buddies and I try to hit at least one away game each season. This time, it was in Ohio, and we were driving back to where we live in New York. We'd left the stadium around 6 in the evening, all pumped up from the game, laughing and joking around. The energy was high, our team had won, and we were just riding that buzz. We'd taken this back road through Pennsylvania to avoid traffic on the main highways. You know how it is. GPS sometimes takes you on these weird shortcuts that save time, but feel like you're in the middle of nowhere. The drive started off fine. It was getting dark, but not pitch black yet. The sky had that deep blue tint to it, and the trees along the road were just shadows. We were in my SUV, a beat-up old thing but reliable. I was driving. My friend Mark was in the passenger seat. He's the one who always navigates because he's got a good sense of direction. In the back were two other guys, Dave and Chris. We'd been friends since college, so the car was filled with that easy banter, talking about the game, replaying key moments, arguing about plays. The radio was on low, some classic rock station, but mostly we were just chatting. As we got deeper into Pennsylvania, the roads got narrower. It was one of those two-lane roads with no shoulder, just asphalt and then woods right up to the edge. Tall trees, mostly pines and oaks, their branches hanging over the road in places, the headlights cut through the darkness, but beyond that, it was just black. Like you couldn't see more than a few feet into the woods. It was quiet too, no other cars around, which was weird because even on back roads you usually see a few. The only sounds were the hum of the engine and our voices. I remember checking the clock on the dashboard. It was around 8:45 p.m. We'd been driving for a couple of hours, and the excitement from the game was wearing off. We were all getting a bit tired, but I was still alert because driving on these roads at night requires focus. The curves were sharp, and there were occasional dips and rises that made it feel like a roller coaster. Mark was dozing off a little, his head leaning against the window, and the guys in the back were quieter, just scrolling through their phones or staring out the windows. Then, out of nowhere, something caught my eye. It was just at the edge of the headlights, on the left side of the road. At first, I thought it was a deer. You see a lot of those around here, especially at dusk, but this was different. It was the mid and lower torso and legs of this figure, light brown, almost tan, like dried leaves or something, and it was moving across the road from left to right with this weird gliding speed. I mean, it wasn't running or walking, it was like it was sliding, smooth and fast, almost floating. It crossed the road in what felt like a split second, but it was long enough for me to see the shape. Long legs, kind of muscular, but not like a human's, more lean and powerful. It vanished into the trees on the right side, just melted into the darkness. My heart skipped a beat. I actually gasped, and my hands tightened on the steering wheel. I must have hit the brakes a little because the car jerked, and that woke Mark up. He sat up straight and said, "What the hell was that?" His voice was shaky, and I could see he'd seen it too. He was staring out the windshield, eyes wide. In the back, Dave and Chris perked up. "What's going on?" Dave asked, leaning forward between the seats. I could feel the tension in the car instantly. The easy mood was gone, replaced by this thick, heavy feeling. "Did you see that?" I said to Mark, my voice coming out all breathy. I was trying to keep the car steady, but my hands were trembling. "Yeah, I saw it," he replied, and he sounded just as freaked out as I felt. "What was it, a deer?" But it wasn't a deer. I've seen deer cross roads before. They're graceful, but they have a certain bounce to their step. This thing moved in a straight line, no up and down motion. It was too smooth, too fast. And the color. It wasn't the brown of a deer's coat. It was lighter, almost pale, and it seemed to blend with the shadows. Plus, I only saw the lower half, no upper body, no head. Just from the waist down, if that makes sense, like it was crouched or something, but moving so quickly. I slowed the car down even more, my foot hovering over the brake. The headlights were still pointed ahead, but now the road felt menacing. The trees seemed to close in, and every shadow looked like it could hide something. My skin was crawling, and I had this cold sweat on the back of my neck. The hair on my arms was standing up, and I could feel my pulse thumping in my ears. "Should we stop?" I asked, mostly to myself, but Mark heard me. "No way, man," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Keep driving. Just keep going." From the back, Chris chimed in. "Yeah, don't stop. Whatever that was, it's gone now. Let's just get out of here." But I couldn't shake the feeling. I wanted to stop, to turn around and look, or at least slow down and see if we could spot anything. Curiosity was clawing at me. What was that thing? Was it an animal? But it didn't move like any animal I've ever seen. It was too unnatural. That gliding motion. It was eerie, like it wasn't bound by gravity or something. I've never seen anything move that fast without making a sound. There was no rustling of leaves, no crunch of twigs, just silence. I kept driving, but my eyes were glued to the rearview mirror, hoping to catch another glimpse. The road behind us was dark, empty, nothing. The trees on the right side, where it had disappeared, were just a wall of blackness. I could feel my breath coming in short pants, and I had to consciously slow it down. Mark was quiet now, just staring out the window, and I could tell he was freaked out too. He's usually the calm one, but his knuckles were white where he was gripping the door handle. The guys in the back started talking again, trying to lighten the mood. Maybe it was a bear, Dave said. They can move fast when they want to. But bears don't glide. They're bulky, and you can hear them. This was different. I've spent time outdoors, camping and hiking, and I know what animals look like. This wasn't right. We drove for another 10 minutes or so, and the whole time the atmosphere in the car was thick with unease. No one was joking anymore. We were all on edge, scanning the sides of the road. Every time the headlights caught a bush or a tree stump, my heart would leap. I kept expecting to see it again, maybe standing there watching us. But nothing happened. The road stretched on, dark and lonely. I remember the exact spot where it happened. There was a bend in the road, and just before it, a small creek off to the left. The trees were thicker there, with vines hanging down. The figure had crossed right at that bend, from the left side where the creek was, into the woods on the right. I could still picture it in my mind, the way it moved, so fluid and quick. It was like it was in a hurry, but not panicked. Purposeful. As we got farther away, the fear started to mix with this deep curiosity. What if we had stopped? What would we have seen? Maybe we could have gotten a better look, taken a photo or something. But then, the thought of getting out of the car in that darkness made my stomach clench. It was pitch black out there. No streetlights, no houses, just woods for miles. If that thing was still around, who knows what it could have been? Mark finally broke the silence. You know, I've heard stories about this area, he said, his voice hesitant. People talk about seeing weird things in these woods. Not sure if it's true, but he didn't finish. But I knew what he meant. We've all heard those tales, Bigfoot or whatever they call it. But I never put much stock in that stuff, until now. Because what we saw fit the descriptions in a way I couldn't ignore. The size, the color, the speed. It wasn't like the movies, all dramatic and scary. It was just wrong, unsettling. We eventually made it back to the highway, and the rest of the drive was quiet. No one talked much. We just listened to the radio, but even the music felt off. When I dropped everyone off, we didn't really say goodbye properly. Just a quick, see you later, and that was it. I think we were all processing it in our own ways. I got home around 11 p.m., and I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying it in my head, the image of that figure crossing the road, the way it moved, the mutual confirmation with Mark. That's what got me, the fact that he saw it too. It wasn't just my imagination. We both saw the same thing, and we both felt that same jolt of fear. For days after, I found myself looking up stories online, searching for similar accounts. I found a few from Pennsylvania, people talking about seeing tall, bipedal creatures in the woods, moving fast and silently. Some called it the Pennsylvania Bigfoot. Others just said it was something they couldn't explain. Reading those stories made me feel less alone, but also more scared. Because if it's real, what is it? And why did it cross the road right in front of us? I wish I had stopped. I know it sounds crazy, but part of me regrets not turning back. Maybe we could have learned something, or at least satisfied that curiosity. But the other part of me is glad we didn't. Because what if we had seen more? What if it had come closer? The thought sends shivers down my spine even now, months later. That night changed something in me. I'm more cautious when I drive at night, especially on back roads. I pay attention to the edges of the headlights, always half expecting to see something again. But I never have. It was a one-time thing, but it left a mark. The terror of that moment, the speed, the silence, the way it made my hair stand up, it stuck with me, and I don't think I'll ever forget it. So yeah, that's what happened. I don't have any answers, just this weird, lingering feeling that there's more out there than we know. And sometimes I wonder if it's still out there, watching, moving through the woods with that same eerie glide. Story 18. Okay, so I've never really shared this with anyone outside of a few close people, but after reading some other stories on here, I feel like I need to get it out. This happened to me and my friend a few years back in Adams County, Ohio. It was one of those days that started out completely normal and then just wasn't. I still get chills thinking about it, and I don't think I'll ever fully shake the feeling that something was out there with us. It was a cold, overcast day in late November, the kind where the sky is this dull gray and the air has that bite to it that makes your nose hurt when you breathe in. My friend had this idea to go for a walk in the woods near his family's property, just to get some fresh air and let his Irish setter run around. The dog was usually full of energy, bouncing all over the place, so we figured it'd be good for him. We parked the car off this dirt lane and started down a gravel road that cut through a thick patch of forest. The trees were mostly bare, just skeletons against the sky, and the ground was covered in a carpet of brown leaves that crunched under our boots. At first everything felt peaceful. The only sounds were our footsteps on the gravel, the dog panting as he trotted ahead, and the occasional rustle of leaves when a squirrel darted by. My friend was talking about some work stuff, and I was half listening, just enjoying the quiet. But then, slowly, I started to notice that the woods were getting too quiet. Like unnaturally quiet. The birds had stopped chirping, and even the wind seemed to die down. It was so still that it felt heavy, like the air was pressing in on us. That's when we heard it. This distant chainsaw noise. It wasn't constant. It would rev up for a few seconds, then cut out, then start again. At first, I thought maybe it was someone cutting firewood nearby, but it sounded odd, too rhythmic, almost like it was being used to cover something else up. My friend heard it too, and he stopped talking mid-sentence. We both just stood there for a second, listening. The dog, who'd been ranging ahead, suddenly came back and pressed himself against my friend's legs. He was whining low in his throat, his ears flat against his head. That wasn't like him at all. He's usually fearless, but now he was acting like a scared puppy. I remember feeling this prickle on the back of my neck, like someone was watching us. I turned around, scanning the trees, but I didn't see anything. The woods were just a wall of grey trunks and shadows. My friend muttered, "What the hell?" under his breath, and we both agreed to keep moving, but slower now. The chainsaw noise kept going, and with everything else silent, it felt like it was the only sound in the world. It was eerie, man, really eerie. We kept walking down the gravel road, but the dog wouldn't leave our side. He was sticking so close that I kept almost tripping over him. His body was tense, and every now and then he'd let out this soft growl like he was warning something off. I tried to shrug it off, telling myself it was probably just a bear or something, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. The feeling of being watched got stronger, like there were eyes on us from every direction. I could feel my heart starting to beat faster, and my hands were getting clammy inside my gloves. After a few minutes, we heard something else, a heavy rustling in the woods to our left. It wasn't the light scurry of an animal. This was something big, moving through the underbrush. It sounded like it was pacing us, keeping parallel to the road. We stopped again, and the dog let out a sharp bark, then cowered behind us. The rustling stopped for a second, then started up again, but this time it was moving away from us, deeper into the forest. It was like whatever it was had decided to lead us somewhere. My friend looked at me, his face pale. "You hear that?" he whispered, and I just nodded. We didn't say much else. We both knew we had to see what it was. Stupid, maybe, but curiosity overpowered the fear at that point. We left the gravel road and pushed into the woods, following the sound. The ground was soft and muddy from recent rain, and our boots sank in with each step. The trees were dense, and we had to duck under low branches and step over fallen logs. The dog stayed right with us, his tail between his legs, but he kept moving, like he was driven by something too. The rustling led us toward a creek that runs through that area. We could hear the water before we saw it, a gentle gurgling that should have been calming, but it wasn't. As we got closer, the chainsaw noise faded a bit, like it was farther away now. We reached the creek bank, and that's when we saw it, a sandbar on the other side, with this huge footprint right in the middle of it. I'm not exaggerating when I say it was massive. It was a bare footprint, like from a human foot, but way bigger than any humans. I'd guess it was about 16 inches long and 4 inches deep, pressed into the wet sand. We just stood there staring at it. The water from the creek was slowly seeping into the print, filling it up, which meant it was fresh, really fresh. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of it. Who would be walking barefoot in sub-freezing weather? And how could anyone make a print that deep? The sand was firm, but not that firm. Then I noticed something else. The creek bank on the other side had a rise about 5 feet high, and there were no other footprints around. It was like whatever made this had stepped right over that rise in one stride. One step, from the sandbar to the top of the bank, without any intermediate prints. That's when the full weight of it hit me. Whatever this was, it was tall, really tall, and strong enough to leap or stride over something that high. I felt a cold sweat break out all over my body, and my stomach twisted into a knot. My friend was breathing heavily beside me, and he whispered, "No way, no fucking way." The dog was trembling, pressed against my legs, and he let out this low whine that made the hair on my arms stand up. We both knew what people say about Bigfoot or Sasquatch, but I'd always brushed it off as nonsense. Now, standing there looking at that print, it didn't feel like nonsense anymore. It felt real, terrifyingly real. We stayed there for what felt like forever, just staring at the footprint. The silence around us was deafening. No birds, no wind, not even the chainsaw anymore. It was like the whole forest was holding its breath. I could hear my own heart pounding in my ears, and I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see something looming out of the trees. The air was so cold that our breath fogged in front of our faces, but I barely felt it. Adrenaline was pumping through me, making me hyper-aware of every little sound and movement. After a few minutes, my friend suggested we head back. His voice was shaky, and I could tell he was as scared as I was. We didn't talk much on the way back. We just moved as fast as we could without running, because running felt like it might trigger something. The dog stayed glued to us, and every time a branch snapped or leaves rustled, we'd freeze for a second, hearts in our throats. The chainsaw noise started up again as we got closer to the road, but this time it sounded different, more mechanical, like it was actually a chainsaw, but still off, too regular, like it was on a loop. When we reached the gravel road, we both stopped and looked at each other. My friend said, "That wasn't human. No one could make a print like that, not in this cold." I agreed, and we both knew we weren't talking about some random hiker or hunter. This was something else, something that shouldn't exist. We hurried back to the car, our footsteps loud on the gravel, and the whole time I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being followed. I kept looking back, but I never saw anything, just the empty road and the silent trees. When we got to the car, we jumped in and locked the doors. The dog was panting heavily, and he curled up in the back seat, still shaking. We sat there for a minute, catching our breath. And then my friend turned on the radio like he needed some normal noise to drown out the silence. We drove back to his place, and the first thing we did was check online and local news for any reports. Maybe a prankster or some animal sighting. But there was nothing. No unusual reports, no mentions of anything strange in the area. It was like we were the only ones who knew. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that footprint, and I felt that overwhelming sense of being watched. I kept going over it in my head, trying to find another explanation, but I couldn't. The size, the depth, the way it straddled that rise, it all pointed to something massive and bipedal. Something that walked on 2 feet but wasn't human, and the chainsaw noise, I still don't know what that was. Maybe it was a distraction, or maybe it was unrelated, but it felt connected, like part of the whole creepy package. To this day, I haven't gone back to that area. My friend moved away not long after, and we don't talk about it much, but when we do, it's with this shared understanding that we experienced something beyond normal. That footprint is burned into my memory, and sometimes I'll wake up in a cold sweat thinking I hear that chainsaw or feel those eyes on me again. I know it sounds crazy, and part of me wishes I could dismiss it as a hoax or my imagination, but I can't. What we saw was real, and I have no explanation for it. None at all. Story 19. All right. So I've never told this to anyone before, not even my family, because I know how it sounds. But it's been eating at me for years, and I need to get it out there. I was 14 years old, living on my family's farm in rural Pennsylvania. It was one of those places where you're surrounded by woods and fields, and the nearest neighbor is a mile down the road. I spent most of my childhood outdoors, so I was used to being alone in the middle of nowhere. But this one evening, it changed everything. It was late autumn, I remember, because the leaves had mostly fallen, and the air had that crisp, cold bite to it that makes your breath fog up. I'd been out rabbit hunting since late afternoon. We had a .22 rifle that my dad taught me to use, and I'd go out whenever I had the chance, partly for fun, partly to help put food on the table. That day, I'd been wandering the edges of the fields, staying close to the tree line where the rabbits like to hide. The sun was starting to dip below the horizon, and the light was fading fast. I remember thinking I should head back soon, but I hadn't had much luck, and I didn't want to go home empty-handed. I decided to cut through one of the bigger fields we had, a wide open space that sloped down toward a dense patch of woods. It was maybe 5 acres of mostly tall grass and weeds, with a few bare spots where the soil was exposed. As I stepped into the field, the light was already getting dim, kind of that hazy gray where everything starts to lose its color. I could hear the usual sounds, the wind rustling through the grass, some crickets starting up and far off, an owl hooting. Nothing out of the ordinary. I was maybe 50 yards into the field when I saw something move out of the corner of my eye. At first I thought it was a deer or maybe a big dog, but then I got a better look and my heart just dropped. There was this figure, maybe 70, 80 feet away, and it was dark, really dark, like it absorbed what little light was left. It was hairy, covered in what looked like thick, matted fur, and it was moving in a way I've never seen anything move before or since. It was crawling on the ground, but not like an animal on all fours. It was low, belly to the ground, and it was dragging its rear legs behind it, kind of like an alligator does when it's moving on land. Its front limbs, I don't even know if I should call them arms, were pulling it forward, and the whole motion was just wrong, unnatural. It wasn't smooth or graceful. It was jerky and heavy, like it was struggling but powerful at the same time. I could hear a faint rustling sound as it moved through the grass, and every now and then there was this low, guttural noise, almost like a grunt, but deeper, like it was coming from somewhere deep in its chest. I froze, completely froze. My grip on the rifle tightened, but I didn't raise it. I couldn't. My brain was trying to make sense of what I was seeing, but it wasn't computing. This thing was big, way bigger than a person. And the way it moved, it was like it was built all wrong for walking upright, but it was still covering ground fast. I remember my breath catching in my throat, and I could feel my heart hammering against my ribs so hard it hurt. My hands started to shake, and I had to clench my jaw to keep my teeth from chattering. The light was fading even more now, and the shadows were getting longer. I lost sight of the thing for a second as it moved behind a clump of taller grass, and when I looked back, it was gone. Just like that. Vanished, but I could still feel it, you know? Like the air had gotten heavier, and there was this stillness that settled over the field, like everything else had gone quiet too. The crickets had stopped, and the wind died down. It was dead silent, except for the blood pounding in my ears. I didn't move. I couldn't. I was rooted to the spot, my legs feeling like they were made of stone. I kept staring at where I'd last seen it, half expecting it to reappear, but nothing happened. The fear was so intense it was physical. A cold sweat broke out all over my body, and I could feel goosebumps rising on my arms. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what it was. A bear, but bears don't move like that. And we didn't have bears that big around here anyway. Maybe a person, but no person could move that way, and the size was all wrong. This thing was massive, and the hair, it was too thick, too dark. I don't know how long I stood there. It felt like hours, but it was probably only minutes. The sky was getting darker, turning from grey to deep blue, and the stars were starting to come out. I remember shivering, not just from the cold, but from sheer terror. Every little sound made me jump. A twig snapping somewhere in the woods, the rustle of leaves. I kept my eyes glued to that spot, my rifle still gripped in my hands, but I didn't dare fire it. What if I drew attention to myself? What if it was still out there, watching me? Eventually, I heard the sound of a tractor engine in the distance. It was my dad, probably coming to look for me since I was late for dinner. The sound got closer, and I could see the headlights cutting through the darkness, bouncing over the rough ground. Relief washed over me, but it was mixed with this dread that I couldn't shake. I still didn't move until the tractor was right there, and my dad called out my name. His voice sounded so normal, so familiar, that it almost made me cry. I stumbled toward the tractor, my legs wobbly and weak. My dad asked me what was wrong, and I just mumbled something about getting spooked by an animal. I didn't tell him what I'd seen. How could I? He'd think I was making it up, or that I'd let my imagination run wild. So I kept quiet, and we drove back to the house. The whole way, I kept looking back over my shoulder, half expecting to see that dark figure following us. The next morning, I woke up feeling uneasy. The memory of what I'd seen was still fresh in my mind, like a nightmare I couldn't shake. I had to go back to that field. I had to know if I'd imagined it or if there was something there. After breakfast, I told my mom I was going out to check the fences, which was partly true, but really, I needed to see that spot again. I walked back to the field, the morning sun casting long shadows across the grass. It looked so ordinary in the daylight, peaceful even. But as I got closer to where I'd seen the thing, I noticed something odd. The grass was flattened in a wide path, like something heavy had been dragged through it. I followed the trail, and my stomach tightened when I saw it. A series of marks in the soil. At first, they looked like drag marks, deep grooves where something had been pulled along the ground. But then, a little farther on, the marks changed. They became footprints, and these weren't normal footprints. They were huge, way bigger than any human foot, and they were shaped differently, long, with what looked like 5 toes. But the impressions were deep, like whatever made them was heavy. The drag marks led up to where the footprints started, and from there they headed straight into the woods. It was like whatever it was had been crawling, then stood up and walked away on 2 legs. I stood there for a long time, just staring at those marks. My heart was racing again, and I felt that same cold fear creeping up my spine. I knew then that I hadn't imagined it. This was real. Whatever I'd seen was real, and it had been right here. I looked at the footprints, then at the woods, and I couldn't bring myself to follow them. The thought of going into those trees where it might be waiting was too much. I turned around and went back to the house, and I've never gone back to that part of the field since. I never told anyone what I found either. What would I say? That I saw some big hairy thing crawling like an alligator, and then it stood up and walked away. People would think I'm crazy. But I know what I saw, and those tracks prove it. To this day, I get chills thinking about it, especially when I'm out in the woods alone. It's like that thing is still out there, and part of me is always waiting to see it again.